Welcome friends to another r/NuclearRevenge video. Today we've got revenge stories against roommates and friends, but first, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons down below so you never miss any of my daily videos. That said, our first story of the day is getting back at my friend for trying to steal my boyfriend. Some friendships are built to last forever. It doesn't matter how early or late in life you meet them. Sometimes you know that they're built to last. Other times you think that a friend will last forever, but they end up just being the one to break your heart. I'm a 22-year-old Black American female, and my now ex-best friend Sam is a 22-year-old white female. Sam and I have known each other since before we were born. Our mothers met at the antenatal clinic because they were dressed similarly and were both new to town. Coincidentally, they also lived in the same neighborhood and took walks together, cooked together, and did a lot of other things with each other. Sam and I were both 3 months apart, with her being older and me obviously being younger. The age dynamic played no part in our life. However, as I grew up in a household that prioritized speaking up for rights, I was quick to speak and was very outspoken about things I didn't like. Sam was more on the quiet side, being the one to calm me down when things seemed to be getting out of hand. Even as a young preschooler, I understood injustice pretty well enough to speak up on it. I was scrawny, but I didn't let the bigger kids push me or any of my friends around. As I grew, I began to recognize passive-aggressive, racially charged situations. And while I was one to call people out on it, Sam chose to stay out of it because she didn't know much on the subject and liked to stay out of things that wasn't any of her business. Now that I think about it, that was a very weird response, seeing as she was best friends with a black person. Still, I was not one to need anyone to fight my battles, as I fought them and other people's own pretty well. Sam's parents were my second parents. They were there for me when my father battled cancer and my mother stayed with him in the hospital. They were there physically and emotionally when I started failing classes due to undiagnosed dyslexia, and they even took me to get it checked out for a proper diagnosis. Where my parents were a little more strong-handed with raising me, and I don't blame them because they were black parents with a black child living in a predominantly white area. Sam's parents were a little kinder. I saw Sam as an extension of her parents, so even while she was out with her other friends and had zero idea of the things I went through, her parents were kind to me, and so she was kind to me as well. The summer before our freshman year of high school, my mother switched from her office job to become a hairdresser, opening up her own town place barely a block away from where we lived. The main reason was so that we could keep an eye on my recovering father and me. She also loved hairdressing, so it was no big deal for her. Almost automatically, she became mine and Sam's permanent hairdresser, making us promise to let her try new styles out with our hair. Now, I've got good hair, a full head of coily 4C hair that's as long as the middle of my back when stretched out. Sam had long, dirty blonde hair that was almost always in a ponytail, but still it was healthy hair. Whenever I didn't have my hair stretched or braided to school and took my afro instead, I would get stares. After a while, I started to notice that my classmates would scoot away from me, giggle and laugh when I passed by. It went on for a few weeks until the school nurse called me in to check for lice, because apparently there was a rumor that I had lice. Let me clarify again that I was the only completely black student at school. The only other person was a mixed-race Japanese girl. I had no idea she was mixed until her father came to pick her up one time in elementary school. As someone who never let things go, I investigated the case to find out who had been spreading those rumors about me. It turned out to be by my best friend Sam. When I confronted her, she swore that it was just a joke that she had told that was taken out of context. I obviously believed her because she was my best friend. We really started to drift apart in sophomore year when I joined the journalism club. I became friends with a different group of kids and we got along really well together. I even got closer to the club's head, who was a class above me and also played basketball. We went on a few dates together before becoming official. I told Sam during a sleepover, but begged her not to tell anyone as it was still under wraps. By the end of the week, the entire school knew my little secret. My new boyfriend was fine with it, but it made me incredibly uncomfortable that my own best friend wouldn't know how to keep a secret from me. Again, I confronted Sam and she brushed it off, saying that everyone already knew anyways, and it wasn't as much of a secret as I thought it was. At that moment, I knew that I had to either stop telling Sam really important things or find a way to change her. Stupidly, I decided that the latter would be easier because not only was she my childhood friend, she was my best friend for Pete's sake. There had to be a way. My boyfriend and I were together for nearly 8 months, and we broke up after I wrote an article on black hair and its significance for the school's newly launched online magazine. A lot of the comments from other people of color students supported the article, but the majority thought that it was too aggressive and somehow felt threatened by it. One of them, who was Sam. It caused a huge discourse among the journalism team on whether to keep the article up or take it down, and when I pushed for it to stay up, it caused a fight between my boyfriend and I. We argued for a whole week, and then he broke up with me for being too stubborn and dramatic about something so simple. He also wanted to get me kicked off the team, but the teacher who headed the club refused it. I was heartbroken and spoke to my best friend about it, and despite being comforting and doing all of the things like watching sappy movies with me and eating copious amounts of junk food, she also let me know just how much she hated that I was dating him. In the moment, it felt good to hear her say it, because I assumed that she missed me. However, in retrospect, I think she meant it in a completely different way. I didn't get with anyone until senior year, when it was time to choose colleges. Sam and I had always wanted to go to California together, so we applied to the same universities. After we got our admission, we started registrations together. During the whole orientation process, I met a cute second-year foreign exchange student who had the nicest French accent and incredibly soft, fluffy hair. We got along as friends pretty well, and although I fell really hard for him, I wanted to take it slow. I desperately wanted to tell Sam, but I had my reservations based on past experiences. During the time that I wondered whether or not to tell her, she let me know that she was in a relationship and needed my advice. Something about her asking me softened my heart, and I exchanged information about my new crush. She encouraged me to go for it and get together with him, which I did. For a while, school seemed to be going well. My relationship with my best friend was smooth sailing, and I had a hot French boyfriend who wanted to be seen everywhere with me. We were together for about 7 months before my 20th birthday rolled around. My boyfriend intended to surprise me with a trip to France, but being the person I was, it was very hard to let anything get past my nose. He decided to tell Sam instead. After all, she was my best friend. From his side of the story, Sam was against taking me to Paris, saying something about not being sure if I would fit in. He also mentioned that most of the things she said them suggestively, as if trying to make it seem like he was the one thinking or saying it. I was, of course, pleasantly oblivious while all of this was happening, simply satisfied that my best friends and my boyfriend were getting along. They even had an inside joke between themselves, and that just gladdened me even more. I don't know why, but I didn't think that Sam would ever do anything to sabotage my relationship. About 2 weeks to my birthday, Sam started telling me about how she didn't trust my boyfriend and that she felt like he was just joking around with our relationship. She also found his old Twitter with some racist tweets and showed it to me, making me promise to never tell him that I had found it. This was where I started to get suspicious of Sam, because my boyfriend still used the same Twitter from over 8 years ago, and most of what he tweeted were gaming crap posts. I was very confused as to who to believe, so I expressed my feelings to another friend of mine. They told me to confront my boyfriend about the accusations that Sam brought forward and see what he said. The way he defended himself would let me know whether he was being honest or not. I took her advice, and just a few days till my birthday, I spoke to my boyfriend about how I felt and the things that Sam had told me. He was very red in the face as he explained that Sam had actually been trying to move on him. This was where he spilled the surprise that he had for my birthday and how Sam had discouraged him against it, saying that I didn't know how to act in public settings and that I was too loud. What broke my heart was knowing that these were things that Sam could actually do. I had deliberately blinded myself all these years because I believed that she would change. But hearing my boyfriend talk, I realized that I'd been fooling myself. Still, I wanted to hear from the horse's mouth and set up a meeting with them both, asking them to be honest or I would never speak to them again. That was when Sam went on a long rant about how you didn't deserve someone like him because girls like me ended up pregnant at 15 and girls like her were the ones who got with boys like him. She said many other things that I would like to not recall, but they were mostly racially charged, and it was so sad seeing all the hatred on her face. Sadness turned to anger when she started admitting to some really crappy things that she had done without my knowledge, and I made it a point to get back at her. After the huge confrontation, it was like a film had been removed from my eyes. I began to see that Sam really wasn't a good person. She did drugs recreationally, skipped classes, and messed around with professors. She also had a few cases of assault and drunk driving to her name, but because she had money, she was able to silence the people she had hurt. I spent an entire weekend compiling evidence on all the BS that she had been involved in, which was well over a year's worth, and I sent them to the school and her parents. Anonymously, of course. She was kicked out of the school and taken to a smaller, more compact rehabilitation center in a desert in Utah, where she was diagnosed with nymphomania, alcohol and drug abuse, as well as some other behavioral issues, and would be watched all the time. Did I feel bad after? Yes, I felt absolutely horrible that I did something so life-changing to get back at the girl who was supposed to be my best friend for being racist to me and attempting to steal my boyfriend. But in order to justify my actions, I always tell myself that if I didn't do it, maybe she would have gone too far. I'm 22 now and just graduated from college. My boyfriend and I are still together, and we're taking a year to travel around Europe. Sam got out of the rehab center about a year ago and started attending community college close to home. I mean, I can imagine how if you have good friends, you're willing to overlook a lot of their flaws or maybe be blinded to them. But if Sam was that bad that they immediately got diagnosed and shipped off to a rehab center, OP must have had some serious blinders on. Do you guys think if you have a best friend who has those active ongoing issues, that it's possible to have enough of a blinding worldview of them to miss all these things? Or did OP miss shockingly a lot of probably obvious stuff? I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is I made my roommate miss her interview. My roommate burnt my songbook, and in retaliation, I got her to miss an important interview. When I decided that I was not going to go to college and that I want to focus on other stuff instead, my mom was not happy about my decision, but she supported me nonetheless. For 2 years, I worked as a manager in my mom's restaurant in town, and the locals knew and loved me. During the day, I was the manager, and at night, I pulled out my guitar and sang for customers. It sure made them happy. My mom was not so happy anyway. She wanted me to move out of town and have a full life. I was content where I was, and I told her this all the time. She wouldn't listen though. She just felt like I was wasting my youth in the small town and not meeting enough people. She also wanted me to pursue a career in songwriting. I've been writing songs since I could write. I love music. Singing and writing songs are my absolute favorite things to do, but I've always preferred songwriting and wanted to become a famous songwriter. A singer, not so much, because I didn't think I was that good a singer, and I didn't want my face out there as a famous artist. It's just too much pressure, and people are mean. Writing songs behind the scenes was my dream, but I was too terrified to chase my dreams. Every day, Mom sternly reminded me that I was not doing anything to make my dream of becoming a famous songwriter come true. I know it was from a place of love, but I wished she just would have let me be and do things in my own time. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old picture of my mom. She was standing before a microphone singing. She was also visibly pregnant. I was shocked. I knew my mom could sing, but I didn't even know that she sang in front of a secular audience. She was in the church's choir, but that was it. The only places she ever sang were in church and the bathroom. My mom got so emotional when I asked her about it. It turned out that she wanted to be a singer too. She was already singing, but she got pregnant and decided to keep me. She also decided that she would raise me in the town her parents lived because the standard of living was less expensive there, and it was easier raising a child in a place where she had help. I was mad at my mom for not telling me about this dream of hers. Are you trying to live vicariously through me? Is that why you keep trying to get me to move out of this town? I asked her in tears. Maybe a little, but honey, what I want the most is for you to live to your greatest potential. I didn't get to make my dreams come true, but I want you to make yours. We hugged it out. I started to make plans to leave town. First, I applied for an assistant job in the city, and I got it. I remembered my pen pal in high school lived in that same city. She was a smart kid who had few friends in high school. We wrote to each other regularly and kept writing to each other even after she graduated from school. She offered that I move into her apartment. Her roommate had just moved out, so it was fine. She was a terrific roommate the 3 months we lived together. She showed me around the city and we spent time together. Sadly, 3 months after I moved in, she had to leave. Her parents had been talking to her about going to college, and she eventually agreed and left. It was when she left that my new roommate moved in. My roommate was a very pretty girl. The first time I met her was when my previous roommate and I interviewed applicants after my roommate paid to have it announced in a local newspaper that I was looking for a roommate. She was sweet and nice and didn't come off as irresponsible, so we decided to go for her. When the previous roommate moved out, she moved in with me. At first it was awkward for us. I wasn't one to warm up to strangers so easily. I was quite shy and could be socially awkward too, but we eventually became quite cordial and then we became friends. We went to the movies together, got coffee together, and got to know and like each other. I was a fantastic cook since I've worked at my mom's restaurant since I was 15, and my mom is an amazing cook. I made all of our meals, so we hardly went out unless we wanted to. I didn't have an issue with my roommate not joining me in the kitchen to cook because, let's face it, she was a bad cook. One time she made coffee and it tasted like contaminated water. She didn't even know her way around the kitchen. I didn't care as long as she cleaned up after eating. It didn't make sense that she wouldn't wash her dishes and then leave them for me to wash. I took time to prepare our meals and I expected her to at least be considerate and clean up in the kitchen after cooking, but she never did that. The height of it was not cleaning her dishes. I hated confrontation, so I always did the dishes, but at some point, I could not take it anymore and had to confront her about it. One night after we had dinner, I asked her why she never did the dishes. "Oh, I just sort of thought the kitchen was your territory." "My territory? It's our territory. As long as you eat from the kitchen, it's your territory too." She says, "Why are you being so extra?" "Fine, I'll wash the darn plates going forward." I say, "Why wouldn't I be? How can you not know you ought to wash your dishes? It's insensitive of you to just dump your dishes in the sink." She didn't say anything, she just left her room. The next morning, I made cookies for us before leaving for work. But when I returned from work, I noticed she didn't touch the cookies. I figured she was still mad about the confrontation, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want her to think that she could just give me the cold shoulder because I spoke to her about something that made me uncomfortable. That night, I made dinner and knocked on her door. "Dinner's ready," I called out to her. She didn't respond, so I knocked again. "Go away," she yelled. I was surprised because I had never heard her yell at anybody. She was quite the sweet extrovert who was dedicated to getting me to go out and get stuff done, and we had never had an issue. I honestly had thought that she would move on from that incident, that I would move on from it too, and we would go back to being friends. She stopped eating my meals, and I stopped including her when planning my meals too. Sometimes she ate food and left the plastic bags and papers in the sink. She would use the dishes too and would take so long to wash them. It was making the kitchen look bad. Sometimes it even smelled. I wondered if she did that just to spite me, but I figured that was not the case. She'd always been too lazy to get stuff done, but I'd hardly noticed because I was comfortable cleaning up after her. My boss was going on a work trip and she needed me to go with her. I packed my suitcase and we flew to a different state that week. It was 2 days of work and more work, and when I returned home, it was a mess. The kitchen stank. I almost cried. Oh, now that I think about it, I did cry about it. I went into my room and cried a little. It was the first time since I left home that I badly wished I didn't leave home. I never had to deal with stuff like that back home. I wished I could pay my rent alone so I would have the house all to myself. When she returned from work, I confronted her about it. She was about to ignore me as usual, so I blocked her from entering her room and yelled at her. We were both angry and we said mean things to each other. She walked into her room and slammed the door in my face. I banged on her door continuously. "Stop annoying me," she screamed. "I'm not leaving your door until you step out and clean up your mess," I shouted back. True to my word, I kept knocking loudly on the door. She came out dressed in a big sweatshirt and jeans and angrily left the apartment. I waited patiently for her to return from wherever she went because I was ready to bother her when she returns, but I slept off. I was too tired for my work trip. The next morning, I saw that she had cleaned up the dishes and the kitchen. I was relieved and went to work. One day, I thought of a fine idea for a song and decided to write it in my songs book. I looked everywhere in the apartment for it, but I couldn't find it. It was a weekend. I thought it would be on my desk at the office. All through that weekend, I looked for it. I would just randomly look for it and then console myself that it was probably just at work. It was such an important book, I couldn't afford to lose it. I still remember what it looked like, a big blue journal with a hardcover. I wrote all of my songs in it and would edit and develop songs in it. It wasn't always easy to remember what lyrics I thought of, so I would write them down until I was ready to create something out of them. That Monday, I went to work hoping and praying that I would find my book. I did not. I looked everywhere for it when I returned home. I was hurt about losing that book. I had all my ideas in it and I can't remember half the things in it anymore. I was so sad about it that I took a day off just to mourn my book. My roommate hadn't been around for a while, so when she returned, I asked if she had seen it. She said no and hurriedly went into her room. I decided to move on and forget about the book. I talked to my boss at work and she advised that I write on a computer rather than a book, so I started doing that. One day I got back from work pretty early and perceived a burning smell from my roommate's room. I rushed to her room and saw that she'd left her curling iron on. I quickly turned it off before it would destroy the dressing table more than it already had. I was about to leave for my room when I saw a blue object on her bed. It was my songs book, only it was just the hardback and the actual book was gone. I looked everywhere in her room for it, but I couldn't find it. I was still searching when she came in. "What are you doing in my room?" she asked exasperatedly. "Where is my book?" I demanded, raising the hard paperback to let her know I was on to her. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I mean, I know. I burnt it. Please don't be mad." Of course I was mad. I was so mad that I said nothing. I just left her room for mine. I knew I could hurt her if I stayed there, and I didn't want that to happen. She knew just how important my songbook was to me and how hard I was working to get one of my songs out there. I couldn't believe that someone would be that mean and cruel. That night I told my mom about it, and she suggested I move out. I agreed, even though that was so unfair to me. I loved my apartment, my room, and my kitchen. Moving out just because my roommate was an evil person angered me. I decided it was my best solution anyway. She was just too vile and I couldn't even trust myself to not attack her for what she had done, so for both of our safety, it was best we no longer lived together. I had started to look for an apartment when one day I got a call on our phone. It was for my roommate, so the caller asked if I could take a message. I said yes and lied about being her sister. The caller was calling to tell me that my roommate had a job interview at a fashion company the next Tuesday. I knew she applied for that position a while ago, and she had mentioned many times how it was her dream to work in that place. I chuckled to myself as I pretended to write the details the caller shared with me down. When my roommate came back from work, I told her about her audition, only that I told her it was Friday instead. She thanked me and tried to apologize again for my book, but I just walked to my room and shut my door. I had nothing to say to her. There was nothing she could say to me at that point. Plus, I didn't want to feel guilty for what I had just done to her. I had a soft heart and I didn't want to spare her the pain of feeling just what I felt when she burnt my book. That Friday, she came knocking on my door screaming, calling me names. I didn't respond to her. I was going to move out the next day anyway, so I didn't care. The next morning, she saw me and tried to physically attack me. I simply told her I would call the police if she dared move an inch closer to me. She stayed back and I waited until a friend from work came over and helped me pack my things. I never saw my roommate again, and I wonder if she's still a mean-spirited person. To this day, I still can't believe that someone burned my book over a minor argument. I guess some people are just extreme. Honestly, I feel like it's for the best that OP moves out from this place because people like that I feel like are the most dangerous. People who you think you understand and would act a certain way, and then out of nowhere they just explode in some crazy way. Especially behind your back like that, I would not feel safe living in the same place as somebody like that. I feel like if you piss them off enough, you're gonna wake up with a kitchen knife in your back or something. My coworker is a fraudster. There are either good coworkers or absolutely horrible coworkers. A lot of the time, there's no in between. I got the Employee of the Month badge a few nights ago, and when I went out with my friends to celebrate, we reminisced a little and I couldn't help but think back to this point last year. I've always been a very high achiever. Right from when I was a little kid, I had to be above all my classmates to remain valid. My parents didn't really help with the mindset, pressuring me to do even better and making me feel like the worst person if anyone got even one mark above mine. I continued like that from the time until high school when we had to choose careers. It seemed like a no-brainer going into finance. I was a whiz at math, representing my school in statewide and even nationwide competitions. I was squeamish around blood, besides my own, so I couldn't get into medicine or nursing or anything close. And while I liked math and physics and calculations, engineering didn't really seem to be for me either. My parents still encouraged me to do a professional course, and since I didn't have any other hobbies or interests developed, I agreed with them and chose accounting and finance as my best bet. Now, college was fun. I won't lie. Despite wanting to die 70% of the time, I was still the same overachieving teacher's pet who needed to please all my professors and parents. I also loved how my classmates and I had to dress professionally and formally for class. It was all part of the appeal. In my junior year of uni, I started to pursue an internship, and it was unrealistically hard to find one that suited me just right. They were either all too male-dominated and sexist, belittled my intending career as an accountant, or just offered me the job of a secretary. I kept running into these sorts of firms for a really long while, and it really stressed me out. During a long call with a cousin, she let me know that the company she worked at was hiring interns all around. She warned me that while it was a very rigid and selective process, she would do her best to ensure that I got in, as long as I also did my best at the interview. The interview was a little weird, with two male interviewers being somewhat coy and maybe even flirty. When I asked about hobbies, I made sure to mention that I loved math and was excellent at it. Now, I kid you not, but the look on these men's faces was similar to telling a child you know how to juggle. They began to throw random math questions, giggling between themselves when I had the answers. The entire thing was honestly so confusing and weird, but I managed to get through with my composure intact. I didn't expect a call back from the firm, so I continued to search other places for nearly 2 weeks. And on the absolute worst day I had ever had, I got a call that I was set to begin work the very next week. I had never been more excited in my life. I got new clothes that weekend, got a new haircut, and even fit my schedule around. The first thing I noticed was that it was a pretty big firm, so I would hardly have any time to see my cousin at all, besides my very short lunch breaks. Also, the department that I worked at had the most employees and the least number of interns. We, the interns, were given nicknames. I was Math Girl, as well as nearly the entire workload. We took turns doing coffee runs and running the most stupid errands. It quickly drained all the excitement I had, making me too tired to even get up from bed sometimes. Now, as a go-getter that I was so used to being proactive, this was very stressful for me. I felt completely useless and needed something substantial to do, so I dressed myself up in my best shirt and pants combo and my highest heels that screamed "powerful woman" to me. And I marched up to the man who introduced himself to all the interns as the boss. I let him know that I didn't like just being a placeholder in the office, and I came to learn as an intern. He looked bored as I went on and on about all my capabilities, but he didn't interrupt me until I finished speaking. When I was done, he quietly reached behind him and pulled out some folders, handing them to me and telling me to figure out what they were. They were account reports for all the years that the firm had been existing. I assumed that these were his own personal documents, and I carefully looked at them for hours on end. A lot of the records from the same time period were not aligning. My brain was so excited to work on it that I didn't realize that the time had passed, and I was almost the only one in the office on my floor. I put the files on my desk and forgot about them for the weekend until Monday came and I had to turn in the documents. The boss wasn't in and rumored to not be around for a while, so I had to answer to one of the guys who interviewed me in HR. We'll call him Chad because that's exactly what he acted like. He was loud and joked brashly when the boss wasn't around. He spent a lot of money on lunch and basically lounged around as if there wasn't anything to be done. Maybe it's just me being a goody two-shoes, but it seemed wrong how lax the office was and how many pizza parties were happening, especially with it being a Monday. I attempted to ask Chad about turning in the files, and he just mocked me in front of all the other coworkers until my face was bright red with embarrassment. When he was done, he finally let me know where the file closet was, and I basically ran there. It was a dusty, musty, and crusty closet that had way too much dust settled on everything on it, cobwebs all over the entire place. It looked like a janitor's closet that was turned into a file dump. Because of how embarrassed I was, I swore to myself that I wouldn't leave the closet until I knew the coast was clear. Staying idle isn't exactly my forte, as you've figured out, so I started to sort through the files to see if they were arranged according to dates. They were not, and before long, I was lost in a rabbit hole of sorting and arranging files. It was a little weird to me that in such a modern age, the firm still decided to use paper filing systems instead of just using computers. But as an ordinary intern, there wasn't much I could ask or say without seeming weird or too inquisitive. By the day's end, I'd figured out a way to sort nearly half the closet before the workday ended. And I'd also realized that a lot of the information on the documents from the same dates weren't identical, and the ones that had been approved by the boss were the ones that looked incomplete. I made it my sole purpose to figure out if I was just sticking my nose in what didn't concern me. I first tried to talk about my findings to my cousin, but she told me that she wasn't paid enough to care. So I took it to my coworker that I was friends with. She was much older than me, but we shared similar interests in things like math and makeup, so it wasn't hard speaking to her. Plus, being an intern meant that I wasn't really given much respect by the staff. What started as a means to just keep me busy was launched into a full-on investigation with my friend, as we stayed till late every day after work, putting figures and numbers together to make things add up. Because we were the accounting and finance department of the firm, all of the money that came into the company was first recorded here. The records were all duplicates of 3s and 4s, but a lot of info was missing or randomly filled in. Whoever did the calculations must have either been in a hurry or just plain careless. I had the good mind to email my findings to the boss, but my friend advised me that it was better if we waited until he came back into the office. My cousin, who wanted nothing to do with the situation, also advised the same, and so I listened to them and waited. It was a stressful wait, and after some time I started to feel a little unsure about my decision. What if the boss knew about all the fraud that was taking place and decided that I was a snitch and kicked me out of the firm? I would never get a job in the finance world again, and I would be a total outcast. The thought alone sent fearful shivers down my spine, but I tried to think positively. I went mainly unnoticed by the rest of the office for a long month, steering clear of their way and continuing to snoop around. Chad didn't really make it a secret, to me anyway, that he wasn't being straightforward. He and his other members of whatever little group that he had formed continued to use the workplace for everything other than actually working. Another entire month passed before the boss came back to the office, and once he did, the first person he asked for was me, and the files I was asked to sort. I went into his office scared as heck, delivering a short presentation of everything I'd found out to him. He had a very expressionless look on his face as he listened, and once I was done, he thanked me and asked me to excuse him from his office. On my way out, Chad caught me and quietly teased me, snickering under his breath like a high school bully. I paid him no mind and went back to my desk with my heart in my throat. The boss didn't call Chad in, and nor did he speak to me until I left. However, when I came in the next morning, Chad's desk had been cleared, as well as 5 other people in the office. There's murmurs here and there about what happened, and after some snooping, my work friend and cousin let me know that the boss was suing Chad and a few other of his accomplices for money laundering and workplace fraud. There was no direct reference to me being the one to expose them, and I was more than thankful for it because I didn't want to be known. However, for the rest of the time that I worked at the firm, my salary came with a hefty bonus. I had to leave the firm after 6 months because my internship time was over, and I was given a glowing letter of recommendation to wherever would be my next workplace. Just before I graduated from college, I started working at a new place, and after my interview was concluded, I was given a higher position than what I applied for. It was such a huge thing for me because a secret fear of mine had always been never getting a good enough job and struggling for the rest of my life. It's been an entire year since the situation played out, and while my older friend / ex-coworker from the firm and my cousin are the only ones beside me that knew about it initially, I've been able to make some new friends at work and let them in on it. No one knows a thing about Chad or where he is, but I'm always going to be super proud of myself for being brave enough to do something like that. When I hear stories like this, I'm always really impressed that people are willing to share it, even though, it's definitely anonymous. If you took part in a situation like this that led to some kind of big money situation, a big lawsuit, is that the kind of thing you'd want to keep under wraps that you just wouldn't tell, maybe even to your closest friends? Or with a little bit of anonymity, would you not mind telling a story like OP shared here? I'd like to know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is I exposed my friend to his parents. I exposed my friend's secret to his parents, and my reason will surprise you. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and parents competed with one another on who had the most well-behaved and most successful children. Many parents tried hard to prove that they were raising kids who were respectful of elders and had certain values instilled in them. I was 12 when a new family moved into the building just opposite our house. The family consisted of an African immigrant couple and their son. Their only child and I soon became friends. He was a good kid, nice and respectful, the kind of young boy that African elders loved. His parents are typical strict immigrant parents. They were very stern and heavily policed their child. It certainly didn't help that my friend was the only child. His parents had many expectations from him and were dedicated to making sure he had a good life and a decent career. The problem, though, was that he and his parents had a different idea of what a good life and decent career was. My parents are also immigrants, but they weren't so strict. They would have supported me if I chose an unconventional career path, but I didn't. I wanted a conventional life, career, and family too. The plan was always to go to college, study to be an accountant, get a job at some great law firm, and start a family. My friend, on the other hand, was to go to college and after finishing college, head to law school. That was the plan his parents had for him. The only other option was that he becomes a doctor. Being a doctor or a lawyer were the options his parents presented to him. They would never let him do something else. They didn't even leave him any choice. They simply told him those were his options. My friend had other plans though. He wanted to be an artist. He drew so well and wanted to pursue a career in it, but he wasn't even bold enough to tell his parents. He had his art exhibited many times in high school, but he never invited his parents to see or showed them. He was worried that they would discourage him, so he didn't bother. My friend was a straight A student. He did very well in school, and his parents were proud and more convinced that he'd become the lawyer's son they wanted. When we were sending out college applications, I tried to make him tell his parents about what he really wanted to do. My friend's happiness mattered to me, and I hated to see him study a course he didn't like. He refused to listen to me and was convinced that his parents would immediately disown him if they found out that his passion was visual art. He was also worried that they won't pay for college, so he went along with their plans for him. I decided to let it be when I saw that he was happy to do whatever his parents liked. It didn't look like he was going to struggle anyway. He was already doing well in school and was a whiz kid compared to me, who struggled to make A's. We were accepted into the same university, and it was the best news ever. Our parents had a small party in our honor. It was surreal. Naturally, we chose to be roommates in college, but we had to ask my aunt, who worked as a staff at the university, to do us that favor. Our parents encouraged us to stay together too. His parents were particularly interested in us living together. My friend's an only child and was quite lonely as a child. His parents have always been happy about our friendship. They treated me like their son too. In school, he majored in political science, and I studied accounting. The first semester in our first year wasn't bad at all. We were both determined to succeed and took classes and academic work seriously. Everything changed after that. The next semester, my friend complained many times about not finding his course interesting. I encouraged him to start drawing again. He didn't exactly like the subjects in high school, but I think drawing and painting made it a lot easier for him. He did that, and his work started to gain attention on campus. People contacted him to paint their loved ones and present the paintings to them as gifts. He was doing what he loved and making money from it. Still, my friend wasn't satisfied. He felt bad that his attention was divided and that he wasn't getting flawless results like he used to. I, on the other hand, was doing so well academically compared to my results in high school. The ones I got in college were great. I was excited, but my friend didn't share in my joy or even bother to hide it. I was telling him one day about a professor praising me after a lecture, and he frowned his face and said nothing. I could have been annoyed at his reaction to my success, but I was willing to understand him. I figured he was in a bad mood or something had upset him during the day, so I went out and shared my good news with neighbors. My roommate and friends soon got worse with time. He hardly attended classes and was mostly always in the room, drinking and sleeping. I tried many times to talk to him about it, but he would just shun me. It was almost like he was starting to see me as his enemy. In the next session, I wasn't interested in being roommates with him anymore, and I made this clear to him, that there was no point staying in the same room as my friend if we were like strangers. He asked to talk and apologized for his bad attitude. He said he was struggling with school and his results were bad. He wasn't used to getting bad results, and being around me, who was doing well academically, triggered him. My mom encouraged me to forgive him and be roommates again. She agreed that it would be tough for him to go from being a brilliant kid in school to someone who was struggling in his academics. What my mom didn't mention was that one of the reasons he threw tantrums was because he was used to being the one who did well, and that I was the one who needed an extra tutor. I knew that it wasn't just about him. My friend was jealous of me too, but I chose not to think about it too much. For the sake of friendship, I agreed once again to be his roommate. This time, we decided it was best to get our apartment rather than stay in the school's dorm. Things only got worse in the second year, though at first he had no attitude. He got laxer about his studies and stopped attending classes altogether. I was reluctant to talk to him about it, but when I was finally able to, he confessed to me that he had dropped out but didn't want to tell me because he was scared I would judge him. I didn't understand what he was on about. I was the last person to judge him and he knew that. If anything, I'm the only one in his life who tried to make him pursue his passion, but he was too scared to color out of the lines. "You can't tell my parents though, or yours," he said. "I'm not ready to break the news to them just yet." Sure, I was certainly not going to tell his parents about it. It wasn't in my place to do that anyway. My friend became very intolerable and annoying. He hated seeing me study. At some point, I had to start going to the library just so I won't trigger him. He would go weeks ignoring me too. At some point, I became very fine with it and just let him do whatever. I stopped trying to get him to talk and became good friends with our neighbors. One thing was sure though, I could never agree to live with him again. It became so bad that he was not only curt with me, but he also behaved himself badly whenever I had company. He extended passive aggression to my guests and would ignore greetings or just roll his eyes at them. He was always very petty, and I tried my best to not rock the boat while looking forward to parting ways with him when the session ended. I decided to host a party at the end of the school year, and I started to make plans for that. I asked my roommate if he wanted to join in, and he mumbled something about having other plans. I was disappointed but tried my best to mask it. My friend and I had plans when we were leaving for college, and that was not it. We planned to organize the most fun parties, to be cool guys who also took our academic work seriously. I shrugged it off, and my neighbor helped me plan the party. We designed the flyer together, and I used her printer to print them out. I sent invites to many people on campus, and everyone was excited about it. That weekend, as people came in for the party, I spotted my roommate outside sitting and smoking a cigarette. I was surprised to see him around since he had said he wouldn't be around and had other plans. I figured at some point that he was just trying to get out of attending the party, but I also thought he'd leave the house at least when the party was holding. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I thought you had other plans." "My plans changed," he said, not even looking at me. "Oh, great. You're welcome to join the party if you want." I was only being polite saying that. I honestly didn't want him around with his foul energy and pettiness. He said, "Nah, I'm good. I don't want to be at your stupid party." I laughed dryly and said, "You know, that works for me. It's not like you're the kind of person anyone wants at their parties anyway. Nobody wants to deal with a man who's being a witch." He threw his cigar on the floor and stepped on it. "What did you just say?" I say, "You heard me." Just as I was about to walk away, he pulled me back and punched me in the face. I retaliated, and my neighbor friend stepped in, and so did other people present. I left the scene with my neighbor. She was disappointed. She said, "Listen, don't let him suck you into his drama. You wanted to end the session with a bang. Don't let him spoil the fun." I agreed, and we went on with our businesses as the hosts of the party. Just as we were all having fun, the cops knocked and busted our party. They'd been called by someone that said there was violence and too much noise going on at our party. The party was mostly filled with people I knew from school. They were all cordial and no one was fighting. The music wasn't loud at all too, and it had been hours since my roommate and I were involved in a fist fight. I said, "I can assure you, officers, there's nothing of the sort going on." That didn't make them change their minds though. They made everyone leave and the party ended abruptly. My neighbors insisted it was my roommate who called the cops on the party, but I was reluctant to believe it. I just thought to myself that he would never do that. That would be too petty and too low. He was involved in the fight too, so it was unlikely that he would rat himself out. My neighbor laughed and said, "It's not like he was going to tell him he was involved. All he had to do was say that it was happening." I waved her off and we went to bed. The next morning, she was in our apartment to clean with me. I drank a little too much the night before, so my head was aching. My roommate started to play really loud metal music over the speaker in his room, and it drove me crazy and made my head hurt even more. I knocked on his door to tell him to keep it down, but he didn't even respond, so I yelled at him to keep it down. "I can't deal with this," my neighbor said and left. My roommate's been a jerk for far too long, but it was the end of the session, and I would never have to be in the same space as him ever again. He soon turned the music off and came out of the room to the kitchen where I was making soup to help with my head. "Sorry about your party," he said with a mischievous smile on his face. I ignored him. "Sorry your fun was ruined." There was a smug, victorious look on his face. "Did you call the cops on my party?" I asked, hoping that I was right and that my former best friend and roommate would never go that low. "Yes, I did." He poured juice out of a jug into a cup, waiting for me to say something. I didn't say a word. I got my soup off the stove and left for my room. That evening, I called his parents and told them their son had dropped out. They were shocked and berated me for not telling them sooner. His parents took that sort of thing seriously, so they flew down to the state we were in and came to the apartment the next afternoon. I found the look of horror on his face when he saw his parents deeply satisfying. His mother was in tears and his dad was very disappointed in him. He knew I did it, and when he looked at me, I shrugged and said, "Sorry for ruining the fun." I left the apartment to give them some privacy, and when I returned, his parents were just leaving. He had apparently told them the truth about not wanting to be a lawyer. I never got to know if they accepted his choice of profession because I got an internship in an accounting firm during summer break, so I moved out early and cut him off. I never spoke to him again. He texted me much later apologizing for his childishness. He added that he was kind of grateful that I told his parents. I didn't care and never responded. Knowing his parents, they would give him a hard time about dropping out. And I felt that would compensate for the times he made a living heck for me. Let's be real here, as much as OP wants to claim this is a real nuclear revenge, I would say this is more like a nuclear favor for their ex-friend. They were just too chicken poop to tell their parents the truth. OP, in an attempt to try to get back at them, actually did them the biggest favor of their lives. Like, yeah, it's gonna be harder, but at least they can actually pursue the thing they want now without shame. Getting back at my sister. Siblings can either be your best friend, your worst enemy, or both. I just want to share how my own sister tormented me until I literally couldn't take it anymore. For context, I'm a 32-year-old woman, happily married with 3 kids. My sister's 29 and is also married with 1 lovely son. Our story goes way back to when we were kids. I was an only child for about 2.5 years before my sister was born. She was a fussy little thing, but my parents said that I was obsessed with her. I didn't doubt them because I always doted over my little sister as we grew older. She was a mischievous little child and always caused some form of trouble for me. It didn't help that I loved her so much, and she was so stinking cute as a kid that I just let it fly, protecting her from whatever consequences awaited or just simply taking the blame if there wasn't a good enough excuse. She was also pretty good at lying to authorities, and with an innocent face like hers, she could actually get away with it all. We were a middle-class family and our parents were very busy people, so I was left in charge a lot of the time from when we were about 7 years old. Even at that time, my toddler of a sister was always up to no good. She hid valuable items and sometimes even herself, leaving me distressed and having to look for her for hours on end, only turning up when our parents came back. Of course, I would get a stern talking to for not having either of our homework done or for being filthy. Sometimes for both. After a few experiences, I worked out a plan with her. She had all the time after school to mess around while I would do all of our homework, clean up after her, and make dinner. 30 minutes before our parents would return, she had to get back in time to get herself cleaned up and pretend like she got something done. Thinking about it now, I should have informed my parents because a child that young had no business being so sneaky. As we grew older, I made it my sole purpose to protect my little sister. I didn't have many special hobbies as she did, so watching over her like a protective hawk was nearly all I did. I wanted to protect her from the harshness of the rest of the world, because I was scared about how she would present to them. I knew she would be misunderstood and judged. In retrospect, I really should have done the opposite. Despite how much I loved my sister, there were a lot of things that she did that pissed me off. I've always been a very calm and non-reactive person, and she's the opposite, which should have made our relationship sort of complimentary, but it was more exhausting if anything. When I was in the 7th grade and she was in the 5th, I got into cheerleading and gymnastics. Despite being on the bigger side, I was really flexible and agile, so I passed tryouts and did pretty well. It was the only place where I've really felt like I did something of my own that didn't have anything to do with my sister for once. That was until she joined the cheerleading squad. I wouldn't have been shocked if she hadn't bashed the fact that I was a cheerleader just weeks before. She called it barely a sport and made a ton of backhanded comments about it, making me feel absolutely crap about my decision. I ignored her and I guess she got mad and decided to join the team as well. It was a little weird having her there, but I let it pass and embraced it. I mean, what could go wrong with my little sister there with me? The answer to that is a lot. We had a game coming up, and being one of the heavier set girls, I usually did a lot of the balancing on the ground with the guy cheerleaders, while the lighter girls did flips and turns. It wasn't like I couldn't do backflips. Doing gymnastics actually made me much more agile than a lot of people on my squad. I just didn't like to talk too much or prove myself to anyone. During our very last rehearsal before the big game, I was able to convince everyone to let me do a finishing backflip after the final formation was set. It was fancy and fun and they all agreed to it. I didn't know it at the time, but my sister didn't enjoy the attention that it got me, and she placed oil on the ground somewhere towards where I would have to place my foot before beginning another set of flips. I twisted my ankle so badly that I needed to sit the game out and have her replace me. Some part of me knew that it was my sister who sabotaged me, but I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was jealousy or a need to be at the forefront of things, but she replaced me as the finishing performance. I didn't plan on leaving cheer until the captain told me that it was for the best, as my sister was much younger and much smaller than me. I took on track in the 10th grade after a while of not doing any sports, and it felt like a nice little welcome back. My sister was in the 8th grade and doing amazing as the assistant cheer captain, and I was there at every game to cheer her on. Track meets started to take up most of my time once I started, and I didn't have the time to show up to my sister's games as much. In the time between 8th and 10th grade, I really got into dancing, and somehow news reached a neighboring school that needed a choreographer that I did both dancing and gymnastics. I became their official choreographer around the same time that I started track, so I had my hands really full. I also didn't have the time anymore to help my sister perfect her own cheer routines, and that made her more than a little upset. I had no idea about her feelings, and she didn't tell me, waiting until there was a statewide cheer championship to steal the tapes of the choreography that I'd been teaching the neighboring school and use them for her own cheer squad. I didn't realize it until it was too late, and my team was disqualified for stealing the moves. My sister's team ended up winning the entire tournament and qualified for the International Cheer Championships. I was so embarrassed, and even though my team was understanding about things, I couldn't help but feel terrible. I knew that it was my sister who did it, but when I tried to confront her, she attempted to gaslight me into believing that I must have taught her the routine without knowing it. It was a blatant lie, but I was so desperate to believe that my sister was anything but a little kid with no real intention to hurt me that I let it pass. She continued to do little things like that, but I also learned to resist and avoid her when I needed to, and to keep my own secrets as well. In junior year, I got my first boyfriend. He was the sweetest person, a foreign exchange student from France that spoke really good English and ran track as well. I intended to attend university in France because of my slight obsession with French culture, so we always had something to talk about. We were together for the last month of junior year and the entire summer preceding senior year, which was about 4 months in total. When school resumed, we went public with the relationship, which seemed to put a strain on the relationship between my sister and me. Used protection and pregnancy tests and even drugs. The hilarious part was that my boyfriend and I only hung out at school or in his own house. I tried to defend myself to my parents, but they were so mad that they decided I was too reckless to spend university abroad. They also believed that my sister was so much more responsible than I, and trusted her with a lot of things. At this point, my sister made it clear that she now saw me as a rival, not as a sibling. My friends started becoming her friends, she got my boyfriend to be her French tutor, and whatever I planned to do, she somehow did it first. It was like something straight out of a typical Mean Girl-esque high school movie, except that this was my own sister who I had never done anything to but love. I didn't know how to approach the situation without some sort of confrontation, and since that wasn't my cup of tea, I decided to let it slide, sinking into the shadows until I left high school. Uni was just out of state, and it was fun enough for me to spread my wings and be myself again. I continued to run track and did a bit of dance on the weekends as well. I felt freer than I had in a while. Unfortunately, my sister joined in my third year, and she wasted no time in pulling a new boyfriend of nearly 3 weeks away from me. Being the bigger person was all I knew, so I let it fly and just continued to live my life. I was willing to continue regarding my sister's antics as childish and stupid until she decided to spread nasty rumors about me. I started to hear things about myself, claiming that I took steroids and cocaine to help me stay on track and stay in shape, and that I also dealt drugs and sold them to other students. That sort of news travels fast, and in no time, I was under fire from authorities who demanded drug tests and countless investigations. Let me tell you, there's nothing scarier than being under for a crime you have no recollection of committing, and nothing hurts worse than realizing it was your own sister who was spreading such things about you. I found out about it by accident. While my dorm room was being searched for drugs, I went over to hers to hang out for a bit, and I overheard her gloating to someone about how clueless I truly was. It broke me to hear my own sister speak like that about me. But I was more angry than anything. Realization hit me that I'd been taking her crap and turning the other cheek since she was born. She was so used to having her way that it seemed like she could get away with anything. I was fed up with having that be the case. Right there, I decided that I would let my sister have a little taste of her own medicine. For someone who did a lot of crap to me, she sure did tell me a lot of things, like how she was in a relationship with one of her professors, who was a married man with a wife and 3 kids. He passed her on tests and gave her access to being able to change her grades that she didn't like. She was also responsible for a few reckless acts that had taken place on campus in the short time that she was around, and I was the only other person besides her that knew about these things. I spent a whole weekend writing carefully worded emails with incriminating evidence to the professor that my sister was messing with his wife, the school's board of directors, and my sister. It was all from an anonymous email address with no means of being tracked, so I was completely in the clear. The next week, the cases against me were cleared, and I watched my sister freak out and cry right in front of me. Did I feel bad about it? Extremely. I threw up a few times due to how much the guilt was eating me alive, but it was something that needed to be done. As expected, my sister was expelled from the uni and had to go to a small community college back home, because it was the only place that would accept her with such a tainted record. The day that she was packing up her bags to leave, I helped her with it, and I let her know that I was the one who sent out the emails. She tried to cry and guilt me for it, but I explicitly stated all of the reasons why she was deserving of it. It hurt me to hurt my own sister like that, and we didn't speak for nearly 3 years after, but when we next did, she called to apologize. Of course, she still attempted to do some crappy things to me over the years since we began talking again, but I now know how much to avoid her, and if it comes to it, give her a generous helping of her own madness. If a sibling or a really close friend were revealed to have been doing all this stuff to you behind your back, would you ever be able to forgive them and rebuild a relationship? Do you think it'd be worth it? I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments down below. That said, our final story of the day is I married my BFF's ex. I gave my former best friend an exact taste of her own medicine. I married her ex-boyfriend, and it was the best thing I ever did. Before you judge me, here's why I broke one of the sacred rules in the girlfriend's code. My best friend is the most obnoxious, double standards person I know. She wastes no time making ridiculous rules for her friends, but followed almost none of them. She didn't understand boundaries and regularly disrespected them. One of the rules my friends and I had was that we can't date each other's exes. My best friend made that rule and we all agreed to it. It made sense, plus it was an unspoken girlfriend's rule anyway. You could date any man in the world, but your girlfriend's ex was off limits. My best friend and I met just as we got into college. She was my roommate and we met our other 2 friends later in college. While we were all very close friends, my best friend and I were particularly close because we'd known each other longer. We were roommates and had a lot of similar interests. The 4 of us remained friends after we left college. We moved to the city and the 3 of us lived in the same building. Our 4th friend lived in a great apartment she inherited from her aunt, but she came around very often. Sometimes we would go to her apartment to hang out. We sometimes had issues, and it always had to do with my best friend acting like she was some diva, trying to get everyone to do as much as was possible for her while she did almost nothing. She was quite selfish. I'd always known this. We had clashed over her selfishness many times in college, but we resolved it each time. And she would promise to work on her character. I soon met a guy at work that I liked. He was the most brilliant, sweetest guy ever, and I had a huge crush on him. My friends teased me about him all the time. Every day I'd tell everyone I was going to ask him out after work, but I never did it. I was too scared to do it. One day my friends had had enough of my whining, and my best friend said, "Listen, if you don't ask him out today, you can't ever talk to us about him again." I decided I was going to do it that day, and I did. He was tidying up his desk when I walked up to him and asked if he wants to get a drink together later. He smiled, revealing deep dimples on the left side of his face. I remember thinking, I didn't know he had dimples, wow. He said, "Are you asking me out?" Yes, I didn't sound exactly confident. I hadn't asked anyone out since I asked a guy to junior prom, and that was a long time ago. "No," he said, shaking his head. I was embarrassed and was just going to say okay and walk away, but then he said, "If we're going on a date, then I want something more than just getting drinks. We should go on a proper date." On Friday night, he picked me up and we went to a nice restaurant in town. It was a very sweet date. He sent flowers and all. I started to think that perhaps this was the one. After a month of going out together, he asked if I wanted an exclusive relationship because that was what he wanted. At first, I was skeptical about being in a serious relationship with someone from work. I did like him, but I didn't even give a thought to what would happen if we decided to date exclusively. I agreed eventually. Life was way too short to not date someone I liked because we worked together. It wasn't like our company had a rule against it or something. I convinced myself that even if it ended badly, I would never allow a relationship to negatively affect my effectiveness at work. Also, he had plans to leave the company and was actively seeking job opportunities in other companies, so I figured he may not even be around for much longer. This guy and I had a great relationship. Nearly all the girls at work wanted to be me. They publicly praised how attentive he was towards me and how well he treated me. My friends were happy for me too, and for good reason. I had dated too many terrible guys in the past, and they were just relieved that I finally had someone great in my life. Due to my experience with guys, I was quite nervous about being with him. I worried too much for the future of our relationship, and it was ruining things. I just didn't trust how good I had it, and despite my friend's advice to chill out, I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. My prophecy self-fulfilled when one day we were together in my apartment and talking about what we wanted our lives to look like when we were 60. He talked about traveling, reading, and reliving old memories with his wife. "You can have your kids and grandkids come around often for the holidays," I said, grinning. That changed the mood in the room. He went from being all bubbly and happy to suddenly quiet and withdrawn. "Are you okay?" I asked, worried that I'd said something to ruin his mood. He said, "I'm fine, I just really need to leave. I have to get up early tomorrow." I didn't know what was going on, so I thought to myself that it was best to give him some time to process his feelings. I knew that something was wrong because he said he had to get up early the next day, but the next day was Saturday. At his apartment on the evening of the next day, he asked if having children was very important to me. I said yes, it certainly was important. I was an only child for a while, until my mom had my brother. Having a sibling made me the happiest person ever. I'd always dreamed about having a family, 3 or 4 kids in a big house. That was when he dropped the bombshell. He did not want to have kids. I didn't get it. "But you love kids." I was surprised because he was good with kids. One time, a coworker brought her toddler to work because her sitter canceled on her. He took care of her child while she attended meetings and made a presentation. He was so good with the child that she behaved herself the whole time she was with him. She didn't throw a tantrum and it was all smiles. When I mentioned that instance, he shrugged. "Yes, I'm good with kids, but that doesn't mean I want to have one. I don't know why I just assumed we were on the same page. You said it when we first went out that kids were messy." "Yes, I did because they are messy. That doesn't mean I don't want them." For a while, we said nothing to each other, knowing what the revelation meant for us. I started to cry. "Isn't there a way? Is there a chance that you could change your mind?" He shook his head and went on to tell me about how his parents ruined his childhood. He was terrified of doing the same to his kids, of repeating the same patterns, and he would rather not risk it. There was no point in continuing in a relationship that had no future. He drove me back to my apartment, and I cried all the way home. When I got to my building and alighted from the car, I noticed he had tears on his face too. It was one of the saddest moments of my life. We certainly loved each other, but we were fundamentally incompatible. I had a rough week the week we broke up. I had promised to never let a breakup ruin my performance for work. So I went to work and did my best, but I would return home, cry, and fill my tummy with alcohol and ice cream. My friends would visit together to cheer me up. Sometimes they came individually. It was hard for them just as it was for me, but what was a devastating heartbreak for me was an opportunity perceived for my best friend. Barely 3 weeks after my breakup, my best friend looked him up on Facebook and asked him out, leading with the fact that she didn't want kids and lying that she asked me if I was cool, and I had said I was okay with it. My best friend suddenly started acting sneaky around us. She barely contributed when I talked about my ex, and she would talk about a mystery man that she was dating. One of our friends offered to set us up on a blind double date, but she refused and said she was seeing someone but didn't reveal who it was that she was seeing. I certainly noticed that something was off when I told my friends that my ex was finally leaving the company because he had gotten another job. I don't know if I should be glad I no longer have to deal with seeing him, or if I should be sad because I'll miss him. Well, you should be glad for him, my friend chipped in. He hated his job there. It's a good thing he's leaving. I didn't think of her response until much later. How did she know that my ex had plans to leave the company we worked in? My ex had cried to me many times about being miserable at work, but I was pretty sure I had never told my best friend, or even any of my closest friends, about my boyfriend's business. I only ever talked about my boyfriend to my friends whenever there was a story and I'm in it. I'd certainly not spill my boyfriend's struggles. I was too weak to ask how she knew. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wanted to be alone and mourn my ex-boyfriend leaving the office. I only found out that they were seeing each other much later. I had just finished with my work for the day when my coworker came over and we started talking. She then mentioned how she loves that I'm open-minded, but that could never be me, she laughed. I'm just not going to be able to get it off my mind, she continued. I didn't understand what she was talking about, so I asked for a clarification. I'm talking about your friend, the one who's now with your ex. I looked on confused. My friend? Ex? What are you talking about? Your friend, you know, the one with the blue highlights in her hair? Did you not know? I'm sorry I said anything. I collapsed in my chair. My best friend always got colored highlights in her hair. It was her signature look. I hoped she was wrong. She probably saw my ex with someone, but she didn't correctly place who. But I knew even that could not be true. This coworker and I have worked together for a while. She's attended birthday parties in my apartment, and my friends have stopped at work many times, so she knew my friends. I went home that evening feeling depleted. I didn't even want to call my best friend and ask her about it. I felt that would be insulting, and if it wasn't true, she would throw a tantrum. When I got to my apartment, I saw two of my friends at the door waiting for me. What's going on? I asked and managed to fake a smile. They said, let's go inside. We went in and they broke the news to me. They found out that my best friend was dating my ex. It wasn't nearly 2 months after our breakup. She knew how much I loved him, and I wasn't even over him yet. My other friends were supportive though. We just want you to know that if you guys have a big fight about it, we support you. And if we have to cut anyone off, it would be her. They went on to talk about how absurd it was for my best friend to do that. I did confront my best friend about it later, and she admitted that it was true, and confessed to having liked him all along. She apologized, but I only pretended to have accepted her apology. She knew just what she was doing. My best friend had always wanted whatever it was that I had. Even when we were roommates, if I got a new pair of jeans, she got one too. Even new haircuts. I decided I was going to get my revenge, but I wasn't sure how. I looked out for ways to treat her just the same way though. Later that month, my ex and I ran into each other and spoke about their relationship. She had reached out to him on Facebook, asked him out, and said that I was okay with them going out. I told him flatly that she lied. They broke up shortly after, and it was so irritating to watch her cry over the same man I had just cried over. My best friend was engaged to this guy, but they broke their engagement, and it was just after that she started to date my ex. When she and my ex ended their relationship, she got back together with her ex-fiancé, but it still didn't work out, and that hurt her. Just like she did with my ex, I sent her ex-fiancé a message on Facebook asking him out. He was quite reluctant and even joked about knowing I was up to something. We started to go out on dates, but unlike my best friend, I wasn't secretive about the whole thing. I told my friends about who I was seeing and they had no problems with it. My best friend probably did, but she just dated my ex too, so she had to shove her feelings down. For the longest time, her ex and I just hung out and enjoyed each other's company, but one day, we took it a step farther and kissed. In no time, we were dating exclusively and moved in together shortly after that. When he proposed and I showed my ring to my friends, my best friend was visibly angry, but I couldn't be bothered. At this moment, I've been married to my husband for a month. What started as a revenge plan turned into a love that we both hope will last a lifetime. It's normal to feel good after carrying out revenge, but this one feels even better because I married the love of my life while at it. My best friend cut me and our other friends off just as we were planning our wedding. She simply stopped speaking to us and eventually moved out of our building. This is a classic case of an eye for an eye. This story actually kind of reminds me of a story about the singer Shania Twain that I heard, where Shania Twain was married to a guy and the guy cheated on her with Shania Twain's best friend. And then in the weirdest wife swap moment ever, Shania Twain divorced her husband and went on to marry her best friend's ex-husband. It was almost like the couples just swapped partners. I'm sure there was a lot of beef going on there. I ratted my sister out to my parents and it destroyed the trust my parents had for her. This happened a long time ago while we were still teenagers. My sister was a senior in school at the time and I was a junior. We were witnesses, and while I tried as much as I could to be the good witness daughter, I sometimes did things my parents didn't approve of, and these led to them constantly grounding me. My parents didn't like me. I knew they loved me, but they certainly didn't like me. Things were different with my sister, however. My parents loved her to pieces. She could do no wrong in their eyes, and to be fair, she hardly ever even did anything wrong. She faithfully attended meetings, all the elders in the kingdom loved her, and she was attentive and helpful. So naturally, she was loved by everyone, both the young and the old. She was the perfect young witness lady, and everyone expected me to be like her. Whatever I did was held up in contrast to what she did or has done. It was sickening, to be honest. Despite the constant comparisons, I had no issues with my sister. I loved her and treated her fairly. But she wasn't always fair to me. You see, my sister became very addicted to the validation and praises she got from our parents, extended family members, and fellow witnesses that she felt the need to put me down all the time just to make herself look good. She took it upon herself to watch everything I did in school and report back to my parents. It was annoying. I was always so terrified of her knowing my business because she would go to my parents and tell them everything. She would also exaggerate stuff and just go out of her way to make me look bad and get me into trouble at home. The first time she did something like this was to tell my parents about a new friend that I had made in school, a girl whose parents were immigrants. She was quite lonely and was not quite used to the new environment. Her accent was also different and she had a hard time communicating with everyone, so I offered to help guide her. It was fun and I felt satisfied doing something for someone, but my sister ruined it by reporting me to my parents. They were mad at me and insisted that I stop being close friends with her because she practiced a different religion. I argued that I was being a kind person, helping her settle in a different country with a different school system, but my parents were not having it. I stubbornly refused, though I didn't tell my parents this. I assured them that I'll end my friendship with her, but I didn't. Guess who saw me with my friend and ran straight to my parents to report me again? If you're thinking my sister, then you guessed right. My parents were furious and even threatened to withdraw me from my school. It was ridiculous. I had to stop speaking to her publicly. She tried to speak to me sometimes, but I would be distant and cold, so she just got the memo and avoided me altogether. Luckily for her, she made new friends soon enough and had fun with them. I felt left out every time I saw her hanging out with her now friends, but I was also glad she was doing okay and not so affected by my distantness. I was very mad at my sister since then and hardly even spoke to her, but that didn't deter her from being obnoxious and running her mouth all over the place. She went on to tell everyone at our family gatherings about how she prevented me from being friends with someone who would have been a bad influence on me. She even made up something about my friend practicing some African religion where worshippers worshipped carved images. That was far from the truth because my friend was a Baptist and even a preacher's daughter. As usual, everyone praised my sister for watching out for me, setting a good example, and being a good big sister. The second time she ratted me out was when my friend, who was also a witness and was in the same grade as my sister, wanted to contest for vice president in school, and I offered to handle her campaigns. This annoyed my sister, and she reported us to our families. Honestly, I think her actions came from a place of jealousy. My sister had always wanted to befriend my friend, but this friend didn't like her so much, and I suspect it's for the same reason I didn't. Our families frowned upon our actions and disallowed us from participating in school politics. They instead made us participate in kingdom activities to keep us busy. My friend and I were mad at her, but we did nothing about it and didn't confront her. Apart from acting like she's the most pious person ever and being so dedicated to pointing out the faults in others so she looks good, she's also very confrontational and controlling. She would yell at me and order me around like I was her child. My dad would delegate his authority over me to her when he and my mom are not around, and she wasted no time in taking away my phone and computer whenever she felt like it. She would then tell my parents a whole different story when they came around, or just exaggerate what I had done. She lied a lot, and it was off-putting. I hated her so much. One of her actions that hurt me the most was her making my mom ground me and preventing me from attending the funeral of my friend's mom. The friend was a childhood friend who didn't go to our school. We used to be neighbors growing up before her family moved out. We hardly got together as we grew up because she didn't practice our religion, and I always had something to do for the kingdom. One would expect that we would drift apart since we didn't even attend the same school and barely saw each other. In fact, we mostly spoke via text and phone calls. When she told me that her mom had passed, I felt like a horrible person. Her mom had battled cancer for a year, and she was being treated in a different state, so I never got to visit her. The funeral was on a weekend, and I was all set to attend and support my friend. My parents agreed when I asked them for permission to go. They felt bad for my friend too and permitted me to go be with her. That weekend, the girl from Africa was hosting a birthday party in her home. Most people were psyched about it and were happy to attend her African culture-themed party. I admitted to my witness friend, the one who wanted to be vice president, that I was curious about the birthday party and would like to know what it was about. We talked about what it might be like together, and just as I tried leaving the kitchen area to fetch something from the living room, I saw that my sister had been eavesdropping. In irritation, I ignored her and moved on to the living room to get what I wanted and continue my conversation with my friend. I knew she was eavesdropping, but I didn't take it seriously or think she could do anything with it. It wasn't unlike her to be so nosy and all up in everyone's business anyway. The morning after, my parents called me into their bedroom and said I was no longer permitted to attend my friend's mom's funeral. I didn't understand why, and I kept asking, but they wouldn't even give a response. I cried myself to sleep that day. I couldn't text my friend to let her know I couldn't be at the funeral because I had to cancel our plans so many times, and I didn't want to be that friend who never keeps her promises. I went back to my parents and pleaded with them to allow me to go, but they refused sternly. At the time, I didn't imagine my parents' sudden refusal had anything to do with my sister. I just thought they were very extreme and controlling. For a week, I avoided everyone and hardly left my room. I saw that I had missed a call from my friend, but I didn't return her calls. I just couldn't. I didn't know how to admit to her that my parents made me stay back. She sent messages too, but I didn't read them. My dad decided that he's had enough of my self-isolation and ordered me to join the family for dinner. I couldn't eat at the table. I just stared down at my plate and burst into tears. My mom was annoyed. "I have to say that I'm disappointed in you," she said. "We've raised you with godly principles, yet you're throwing a fit over missing a birthday party?" I didn't understand what she was talking about. "What birthday party? What are you talking about?" I asked in tears. "Stop acting. We know what you tried to do." She rolled her eyes and dropped her cutlery. "We know that there was no funeral and you just wanted to get out of the house and attend that idol worshiper's birthday party." As soon as my dad said that, my eyes widened. It occurred to me that my sister had lied again. She had either deliberately lied to my parents just to hurt me, or she heard my friend and me wrong, and rather than ask me questions, she ran to my parents and lied. I was enraged and I charged at my sister. My dad was quick to stand between us, and he held me before I could pull at her hair. My parents didn't even listen to me. They took my gadgets immediately and sent me back to my room. Later that day, we were visited by an aunt who was told what had happened. She came into my room and offered to resolve the differences between us girls. It turned out that my sister had heard my friend and me talking. She heard me say that I was curious about what an African-themed birthday party would look like, and she thought I had lied about my friend's mom's funeral so I could go. It didn't help that the party was held the same Saturday as the funeral. My aunt made us hug it out, and my dad and sister apologized to me for not investigating properly before ordering me not to leave the house. My mom was still skeptical. and felt I was lying. She expressed disappointment that I was even curious about the party in the first place. My parents had me take different Bible study classes during the week with them and watched me closely. I felt betrayed by my sister and I hated her even more. Worse still, the friend whose mother's funeral I didn't attend cut me off. She blocked me to prevent me from reaching her, so there was no way to send her an apology. It was a tough period for me, and I withdrew from everyone and everything. Just as I was getting back out there and trying to get over what had happened to me, luck smiled on me and my chance to get back at my sister dropped on my lap. My witness friend saw me in school and said she had something to tell me. We met at the school's cafeteria, and she made me go with her to the restroom. I wondered what was so scandalous that we had to go to the bathroom to discuss, but I soon understood why she was acting so mysterious. She had found out through someone in one of her classes that my sister was dating a guy in their grade. This guy was a non-witness and was on the school's football team. He was popular in school and all the girls liked him. I found it difficult to believe that he would like someone as reserved as my sister, or that my sister would like someone so loud, out there, and even more so, a non-witness. My friend said she wasn't going to tell anyone about it though. I just didn't believe my friend. Plus, after what my sister had done to us, one would think that she would be eager to report her. At the same time, I knew my friend wouldn't lie about something like that. That same month, my friend and I were in the library. She was reading a novel she had started some days before, and I was studying. I heard muffled sounds from the back and got irritated. It wasn't unusual to have kids come to the back of the library to kiss. Students were hardly ever in the library, especially in the far back, and that was precisely why I was in that part of the library. It was usually quiet, and I'm able to study without distractions. Well, the muffled sound was distracting, so I went there to tell the couple to get a room. Shockingly, it was my sister and her boyfriend. I couldn't believe my eyes. I called for my friend and she joined me and burst out laughing. My sister and the guy had been kissing. I simply picked up my stuff and walked away with my friend following closely and the guy following us. He tried to convince me that it wasn't her fault, but I said nothing. When he saw that I wasn't yielding, he turned to my friend who was simply amused and tried to convince her to talk to me. As my friend drove us home, she laughed about how much of a hypocrite my sister was. She was having so much fun, but I wasn't thinking amused. I mentally planned how I would report my sister to the elders. I refused to speak to her when she got home and tried talking to me without even speaking to my parents. I visited an elder and I reported her. I even faked tears and acted as though I was heartbroken that my sister had disobeyed God's rules. The elder was shocked. They all know my sister to be pious and in good standing, so he didn't expect it. He even admitted that if he had been told that one of my parents' children would do something like that, he would have thought it would have been me. I was very pleased that I had shattered everyone's image of her. The elder commended my honesty and spoke with the other elders. As was the custom, my sister was summoned by the judicial committee. I already told the elders that my friend saw it too, so she was there to bear witness against my sister with me. While my sister was repentant and sorry for her actions, she still had to be disciplined for her actions. She was reproved and could not participate in certain activities for a long while. My parents and everyone thought I'd done it out of goodwill, but it was my way of getting revenge on my liar sister. She had gotten me into trouble too many times, so I didn't feel an ounce of guilt for all she had to do to be in good standing again. If she hadn't been such a snitch, I would not have reported her. If you choose to live that kind of life, it's your choice, but that just sounds so restrictive. But anyways, does it surprise anybody out there that somebody who is so happy to run around and report you for doing all these awful things behind your parents' backs, that stuck-up snitch of a person is actually running around doing just as awful things? Do you believe somebody could go around eavesdropping and snitching left and right and still in their personal lives be the pious and goody-two-shoes? Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is I stole my job back from my evil coworker. Evil Pete joined the company where I work 6 months after I was employed. And by the end of his first day, it was clear that he wasn't there to make friends, or at least not with anyone who was on his staff level, and I got the first-hand experience of his cold nature when I went to offer him a cup of coffee as a welcome to the office type of thing. As I handed the cup to him over his cubicle, he said, "Are all the interns here stupid? Why would you pass a cup over my desk? Do you want to spill something on the company's computer?" I had to blink a few times before smiling, default response to any sign of aggression, and then I told him I wasn't an intern and I didn't think the sealed styrofoam cup would have spilled over unless someone knocked it out of my hand. All with a chuckle, of course, because heaven forbid I upset him by coming off as assertive. The minute he heard that I wasn't an intern, he looked nervous. But by the time his eyes fell to my badge, where my title of Software Engineer 2 sat, his eyes were back to being cold. He didn't apologize for this misidentification, or for calling our intern stupid. All he said was, "I don't drink coffee. If you don't mind, I'd like to get back to work." Of course, I nodded and smiled and walked away. As I was leaving, I was wondering what work he had to do on the very first day, since my onboarding process had taken a week, but I didn't pay much attention to it, or him, until about 2 weeks later when the members of the junior level staff were talking about him, when all the software engineering teams went out for our monthly unit lunch, which Evil Pete conveniently missed. One junior dev talked about how Evil Pete shredded the printed out papers of their pitch presentation because he didn't see valuable information on the front page and thought it was a test print, since no one was near the printer, and didn't want to get his documentation papers mixed up with random trash. So the person had to reprint their pitch and push back the presentation. The stories just went from bad to worse, and it was like there was a general consensus. We didn't like Evil Pete and he didn't like us. He wanted to prove that he was better than all the other junior devs and suck up to the team leaders and C-level staff, so everyone stayed far away from him and minded their business. But my business landed me on his radar. I'm not one to brag, but I'm really good at my job. In fact, I'd heard my line manager suggest that they were considering promoting me to senior engineer. And because of how much rep I have with the senior staff and management, Evil Pete got jealous very fast. I was the same person he had mistook for an intern on his first day, and it looked like I was about to leave him in a lower level. He wanted the acknowledgement I had. He was gunning for the senior engineer promotion, and he wasn't trying to hide it. No, bet your butt he didn't. I knew what I was capable of work-wise, but I knew what Evil Pete was capable of evil-wise. So I was doing my best to avoid him. I collaborated with him on all the projects that we worked together on the 4 months before crap hit the fan. Almost literally, but when I could, I avoided him like a contagious rash. And then he got really aggressive with his passion for work. He was working overtime more than anyone else on our floor, and he wasn't even getting paid for half that time because there's a limit on the overtime payment the company offers. So no one understood why he was doing it, but I did. After all, I was the one receiving passive-aggressive messages on our project team group chats. But mentioning my suspicions would have come off as feeling conceited, and I don't believe in working hard over working smart, so I wasn't worried. I already mentioned how much of a let go, let love person I am. So I don't think my girlfriend was surprised when I told her I wasn't going to do anything about his behavior since he wasn't directly affecting my work. She was adamant that I report to the HR team, but I didn't feel there was any substance to it. And then there was. About 3 months after Evil Pete joined the company and started eyeing my promotion, I had an unfortunate mistake at work. I had created the document brief for a new feature for one of our clients' apps, and it included a link to some software architecture that I'd created for my portfolio. I knew it was impressive, and I was excited to show my team leader at the next meeting we had. Unfortunately for me, I was so excited that I mentioned the something special that I had for the meeting to a colleague while waiting for the elevator a day before the meeting. I didn't notice that Evil Pete was standing behind us in the small crowd waiting for the elevator until my colleague murmured, "Pete, you not getting on?" But I didn't think too much about his silence because he wasn't a friendly person. And then it made sense. The company works hybrid days, so we weren't all physically at the office on the same days, and the meeting was remote, so I presented my pitch while sharing my screen on a conference call with the team leader and some of the members who were working with the client. When I got to the bit with the architecture I had created, I did a little spiel about how I'd worked on something, and I thought it would be really cool if we were able to incorporate it for the feature update. Then I clicked the link, and a Rickroll played. I couldn't speak for a few seconds, but my team leaders were laughing. Then my team leader said, "I appreciate the humor, but you didn't need to do that entire speech just to Rickroll us, you know." And there was more laughter, and I was mortified. But I quickly played it off and said something about how I needed to catch them all with their guards down. The meeting carried on, but I was seriously worried. We joked around often, yes, but the meeting was serious, and if my manager had been in a different mood, it probably would have gone much worse. I was lucky, but someone had planned that I wouldn't be. And that was when I remembered my colleague's elevator comment from the day before. As soon as the meeting ended, I called my girlfriend and told her what happened. She couldn't understand how Evil Pete had gotten access to my document because it was on Notion. It didn't take long for me to remember that the day after the elevator comment, I had left my computer open to grab a cup of water from the dispenser right by the door, and a junior engineer had stopped to ask a few questions about the feature she was working on. Evil Pete was leaving the office as I re-entered, and by the time I got back to my desk, the screen of my computer was still on, and I thought it was just running some background operations. The math added up really quick, and I realized that Evil Pete didn't even have to do any brain work to get access to my computer and the document. It didn't take a genius to figure out that he'd changed the hyperlink I included for my software architecture. It was simple, but it could have been the worst outcome imaginable if my manager hadn't laughed it off. My girlfriend was fuming, and she wanted me to do something about it. The only proof I could think of to convince HR that Evil Pete was malicious was CCTV footage of the office, but I wasn't sure it would hold since there were no actual consequences from what he did. So I decided to just sit on it and see what would happen next, because I knew there had to be more from someone who was bold enough to mess with my work. And he proved me right. For about a week after that, he would question every single suggestion I brought up and try to undermine my solutions, especially when we were on calls or had meetings with senior management. One time, we were doing a project briefing with the CTO in a conference room, and Evil Pete knocked over his cup of water, and it spilled on my laptop. Immediately, he acted super sympathetic and said, "Oh, you missed reaching for your cup?" Everyone else had been focused on the person speaking, so they thought I was responsible for the spill. I had to rush out to get the laptop to the hardware tech guys so they could assess the damage. By the time I got back, the meeting was ending, and my manager told me Evil Pete will be handling most of the major parts, and I could provide consultation for him. The project wasn't a big one, but it had the attention of the CTO, and that was something I needed to get the promotion as soon as possible. And Evil Pete was obviously trying to mess it up. Complaining and convincing my manager to hand the task to me would have been petty, so I just decided to just let him handle it. But then he did something that was really the straw that broke my patience. I was going home about a month after the Rickroll incident, and this was 2 weeks after the project was basically assigned to Evil Pete, and he had just started working on it. It was super late because I had to stay back and work on something with my manager, and Evil Pete had also worked pretty late because he was in the foundation parts of the project. Anyway, I was about to get into my car when I noticed that one of the back tires was flat. Evil Pete had left the office about an hour before me, and I didn't have to guess twice about who was responsible for the damage, but I still needed confirmation. So I headed back inside and met with a security guard at the front door. Because I was super friendly with him and always brought back coffee for him during my lunch breaks, he was eager to help me and paged the surveillance room to let me have a look. I got to see the footage and my suspicions were right. Then I convinced them to show me footage from the day that Evil Pete messed with my document and the video that showed he had gone to my computer like 20 seconds after I got up and left after like 2 minutes, which coincided with when I entered back into the office. They couldn't give me the footage without approval from HR, but they helped me cut and place the videos in a folder for easy access. and I called a cab and went home. My girlfriend was pissed and wanted me to report to HR first thing in the morning, but I was even more pissed and I knew I had to get back to him in a big way. The next week, after calling an auto shop to pick up my car and paying an absurd amount for my tires to be changed, I was getting a bit late to work, but I headed into the building with coffees for the security guys that had helped me and for the 6 people who worked in the same office space with me. Yes, including Evil Pete. I made a show of handing the cups to everyone, and when I got to him, I even made a joke. Now you know I'm not an intern and I'm handing the cup to you through the side. Good luck with the project, man. He didn't crack a smile, but he collected the cup and took a sip before thanking me. That was all I needed. See, I'd been feeling constipated for a while and I'd even taken a sick day in the past couple of days, so I'd been a bit heavy-handed with the laxatives I added to my coffee that morning. If I accidentally gave my cup to Evil Pete, well, that was yet to be proven. After all, his real name starts with S. And so does mine, so it was easy to mix up the S and ST when I handed the cup to him. That's the defense I'd planned in case he called my bluff, because I knew he was going to confront me when he started sweating before even making it halfway through the cup. He had to take multiple bathroom breaks and was beginning to look very pale. Unfortunately for him, he had to do a meeting with the team leader and CTO for a key addition to the project's features. But it got so bad that he had to leave for the hospital an hour before lunch. The meeting was immediately after lunch, and the CTO couldn't reschedule. So I jumped to the rescue. I told my manager that I'd familiarized myself with the brief and could take over for Evil Pete since he was still on the foundational bits. They were relieved, and I smashed that strategy meeting to bits. My ideas were through the roof, and the complex features they wanted to include were looking seamless, if I do say so myself. And when I told them I could finish the project in half the time Evil Pete had requested, my team leader was proud, the CTO was impressed, and the meeting ended with them telling me to expect an email before the close of the day. The next day, Evil Pete came to work looking marginally better, but still pale and very furious. He headed straight for my desk and asked to see me in the hallway. I went with him without as much as a complaint. "I know what you did to me and I'm going to tell HR." I looked at him and I laughed and I told him, "That's alright, but let's see who can get there first. After all, I have a video of a certain someone slashing my tires while pretending to tie their shoelaces." Immediately his expression changed and I just had to drive the kicker in. Also, it would probably be best if you don't make it a habit of calling a senior engineer away for a chat during work hours. My time officially costs more than yours as of this morning. Before he could respond, an intern came up to us and told me that HR needed me to come down for a new passport and they'd been trying to call my phone. Evil Pete was brimming with anger, but he couldn't accuse me without blowing his own cover, so he walked away. And I went to get my passport taken for the job I stole back from the worst coworker ever. Honestly, I loved this story, but I just wish that HR was properly reported for this guy. I imagine that has to be in the future for Evil Pete, right? There's no way that OP can keep working this awesome job that they finally earned over Evil Pete, knowing that he's probably going to be lurking in the wings trying to find any way to take OP down. Report him to HR and get him kicked off the team so he can't attempt to sabotage anything. Is becoming a bad mom to teach my kids a lesson? Children have always been said to be a blessing, and while that's very true, I also believe that without proper discipline, they can turn out to be the biggest jerks ever. I'm 37 years old and I'm married to my husband Connor, who's 40. We have 3 kids together, Matt 17, Jeannie 15, and Luca 13. These are all fake names, but their ages are real. As a kid, I was a model child to my parents. It wasn't because I had to be, I just didn't have a rebellious bone in my body. We weren't exactly religious, but being raised in a very small town that was mainly Christian meant that we were attending Christian schools and doing things according to the customs. My siblings and I got along really well, mainly because we stayed out of each other's businesses and covered for ourselves when we needed to. Sure, we did have the occasional sibling squabble because there were 5 of us and we did get in each other's ways sometime, but we knew how to take care of things really quickly before anyone else would find out. Things only reached our parents when they got out of hand, which rarely ever happened. Because of how young I was when I started school, by the age of 16 I'd already started community college to study journalism. I met my now husband, who was 19 at the time, and we hit it off immediately. I graduated from uni at 19 and was married the next month after my high school graduation. Connor had a job as a truck driver and made enough money to support a family as a young man. Plus, he also inherited his grandparents' place in El Paso, Texas, so we moved states to live there. To say that I was excited to start my own family would be an understatement. I love the way my parents loved each other enough to get married so young and have all their children barely a year apart. We literally grew up with each other, and it made for a lovely family dynamic. My husband had a very different, almost opposite upbringing, but he was a very positive person and embraced change really well. So we were equally excited to build a family together. I found out that I'd gotten pregnant exactly 3 months to my 20th birthday, and 6 months later, I had my first son, Matt. The pregnancy and birth was really smooth, and my entire family, as well as my husband, were there for me. I healed up quickly enough to take care of my newborn son, and because of how easily the pregnancy and birth were, I decided almost immediately that I wanted a huge family, 7 or 9 kids at least. Now that I think back, I'm sure it was baby brain that made me speak like that. I nearly go crazy every day with just 3 kids. Connor was a little more realistic, and although he didn't outrightly tell me no, he also reminded me that kids cost a lot of money. At the time, I didn't care much, but as the kids grew, I started to see reason. Matt didn't really give any issues until he turned 1. He began to fall sick nearly all the time, and we stayed at the hospital a lot. It stressed me out, especially as I had to deal with a lot of it on my own. Because of the nature of his job, Connor was away a lot. I started to fall ill a lot as well, and I self-diagnosed it as either a common cold or the flu, taking over-the-counter pills and treating myself. It wasn't until I fainted and a friend found me and took me to the hospital that I realized I was actually 3 months pregnant. I gave birth to Jeannie exactly 2 months after I had Matt on the same date, and it was endearing. Immediately, Matt expressed his distaste for his sister. Initially, I thought it was just a toddler's thing. After all, he was barely 2 and still loved being the center of mommy's attention. I was so wrong, because right from Jeannie's birth, it was like her brother wanted to kill her. He would cry for hours on end for me to return her, refusing to eat until he fell asleep in a pool of his own snot. Sometimes, if I ever left Jeannie alone, I would come back to find her falling victim to her brother's antics. One time, he put toothpaste all over her face and body, telling me that her mouth smelled bad and he was just helping her clean it. Jeannie didn't even have teeth at the time. What made it a little sadder was that Jeannie absolutely adored her brother. As they got older, she got into a lot of trouble on his behalf. As a parent, it really concerned me, but I was advised to let her learn on her own. After Luca, I decided that I didn't want any more kids. Connor was on board with this decision, mainly because kids were a lot and he didn't want me to have any more on my hands than I already did. He wasn't around as much, and having any more kids would mean more work for me. Matt was still a jerk of a child to his siblings, but Jeannie and Luca were glued together at the hip. Once Luca was old enough to get up to trouble, he and his sister made sure to make me yell my lungs out. Like any other parent, my husband and I love our kids to bits and would give the entire world for them. We made sure to tell them these things every day, and we make sure to show them as well. As they got older and their personalities formed, Matt turned out to be the jerk I guessed he was. Jeannie was more kind and quiet, meek until she was angry enough to blow. Of course, she loved her brothers, especially Luca, and protected him. Luca was a bit of a clumsy little talkative and used to get teased a lot until Jeannie got all his bullies in trouble for it. She was very thoughtful, and I had no problem giving her a lot more responsibilities than her older brother. As he grew, Matt made his father and I concerned. He got into trouble a lot at school, being unruly for no reason, and making trouble with people that were smaller than him. I had no idea about his antics for a while because he made his sister pretend to be me when they called home on his behalf. I tried to talk to Matt, get his father to talk to him, his aunts, uncles, and grandparents, but it all ended the same way, with a promise to do better and then doing worse. In 8th grade, Matt's grades started to suffer greatly. We thought it was because he had a hard time understanding the teachers, so we took him to check if he had any developmental setbacks. He tested negative for ADD and ADHD, and the psychiatrist let us know that he was actually a very normal child. He was just stubborn and wanted to annoy everyone around him. I went the extra mile to offer to tutor Matt because I taught in his school and took a few classes for the grades above him. Nothing seemed to be changing, except the fact that his younger siblings took it as a sign to begin rebelling and stressing me the freak out. I read every parent and self-help book that I could find in the library and I applied it all, but still nothing seemed to change. I tried being kinder, stricter, nonchalant, and everything in between, but my kids paid me no attention. It depressed me for a while because motherhood was my entire life and it had begun to feel like I was failing at it. My husband and friends tried to comfort me, but it felt like they didn't understand at all where I was coming from. After all, my husband was barely home, and when he did eventually come home for a few days or weeks, the kids somehow put on their best behaviors for him. Most of my friends were either just starting out with being moms, or their kids didn't give them as much trouble. I felt bad even comparing my kids with those of my friends, or myself and my siblings when we were younger, but I couldn't help it. I came to the conclusion that maybe I was being too much of a good mother to my kids, so it made them start to lose touch with the real world. After all, they had no real responsibilities besides going to school. I made breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day while doing all of their laundry and cleaning up after them. Even with all the things they weren't doing, they got lunch money and their allowance every week, no question. Maybe I was enabling their behaviors, but it had to come to an end because I didn't want to be the mother that raised 3 jerks. I had tried to talk to them about their behaviors a few times earlier, but my kids all told me in their own lingo that they're grown enough not to need policing around from me. It wasn't something I was used to, so I had to start small. I made sure to announce that I wasn't going to be doing anyone's laundry but my own anymore. Of course, they ignored me until they had nothing to wear anymore. It was hilarious watching all 3 of them figure out how to use a washing machine on their own. Once they had gotten the hang of it, I let go of doing chores like doing the dishes, taking out the trash, and cleaning up their rooms. I didn't say anything to them until the kitchen started to stink after days of an overflowing trash can. They figured it out all on their own, even assigning days to each other that they could start taking the trash out. The last thing I did was a little hard for me, especially as my own mother had never used it against her children, but I had to remember that my siblings and I were different from my children. I stopped cooking breakfast and making lunch for my kids, leaving their own feeding in their hands. Sometimes I ordered a pizza or Chinese for myself and locked myself in my bedroom, pretending not to notice when they would walk past my room a million times. It did take them a while to realize they could not take care of themselves on their own, and for the first time in my life, I watched my 3 children, 2 teenagers and 1 preteen, work together. They cornered me one day to apologize for whatever they had done to make me stop cooking for them. I used that opportunity to have a long talk with them, letting them know that I would not continue to do anything in a house where I would not be appreciated. I was surprised that they listened to me at all, and it definitely did take some getting used to, but my kids figured out that not being crappy was much better for everyone. Unfortunately for Matt, he had slacked off really badly in school, and he couldn't go forward from 11th grade to 12th. He had to redo the class again because he completely failed. It was all I could do to comfort him, while also letting him know that this was just the consequence of his own action. For the entire time that I transformed myself from super mom to super terrible mom, my husband stood by me through my all, assuring me that I was doing the right thing. He played the good cop to my kids, promising to talk to me after every time they called him to complain. It still feels weird that I got revenge on my kids for being jerks, because, I mean, they're kids. But it worked wonders. Matt's repeating 11th grade, and he's doing better than ever. Being in the class as his younger sister is really humbling for him. Jeannie and Luca are my precious little best friends again, and although Matt still teases them, I can say that it's mostly harmless now. Of course, they're young, and I expect them to screw up a couple more ways over the next few years of their lives, but they'll always think twice before they're jerks to me or anyone else ever again. I mean, this is great because if your kids are growing up to be spoiled, entitled, sometimes what you need to do is just pull back that curtain and let them realize that there is a lot of stuff being done for them every single day. And if they want to act stuck up and spoiled, well, maybe they can see if they want to keep acting that way when they have to be the one doing everything. If your kid was on the brink of failing class though, and was acting super spoiled and entitled, and you could jump in, do the work for them, and save them so they wouldn't flunk, would you save them, or would you let them fail to let them learn a lesson? Let me know what you guys would do in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is he wanted $10,000. I left him sick and broke. When I was 15, I realized that my dad hates me. And I know that a lot of teenagers tend to be that way, but for me, it wasn't just the usual, oh, he's so strict, he hates me type of emotion. It was actually valid hatred. That was the year that my mom died, and although he'd been heavily abusive all my life, it felt like when my mom died, something inside him completely snapped, and he just couldn't stand me. But I was his responsibility, at least legally, so he couldn't push me out of his house. After all, it wouldn't look good for a church leader. Although he couldn't escape from living with me, my dad made sure I couldn't escape the living heck situation. Every other day, he would remind me that I pushed my mom to end things. And sometimes he'd throw in a nice round of good-for-nothing waste of space genre of insults. But I accepted every last insult because I knew he was right. If I hadn't told my mom about him cheating on her, she would have remained in her bubble of ignorance and not been pushed so much to drink that she became depressed. But I don't regret telling her as much as I regret the fact that the one time I got her to listen to me, I wasted it on a subject like my dad. All my life, I'd wondered what exactly I did wrong in the baby warehouse to be assigned to parents like mine. But when my mom died, my dad stopped being my dad. Quite literally, he told me he wasn't my father, and my mom had come back pregnant after running off early in their relationship. Why did she run? He accidentally hit her, and she didn't want to stick around to find out if it was an accident or a habit in progress. Of course, I came to that conclusion on my own, but all my dad told me was that he had convinced her that he would sign the papers and make me his legally if she decided to marry him and never tell the church about the slap. He was a 36-year-old youth leader in the church, and he was climbing the corporate ladder, but my mom was 24 and barely educated. She knew that the odds of having a better life were slim, and she didn't want to find out how slim they were, so she obviously decided to be with him. And I was paying for it 15 years later. When my therapist asks, I don't say it was the hardest year of my life anymore, because now I realize that every year I spent living with the man was as difficult as the last. My tolerance level just got higher and higher until it was non-existent. He had lost his trophy wife at such a young age, and my dad wanted me to suffer like he was. One night while chugging a bottle of vodka after getting home from a Bible study, my dad told me that I was the last connection he had to his wife, and until he died, I belonged to him. And I think we both really believed that. I felt I was the sacrificial lamb for my mother's sins, and he probably thought so too. First it was side comments about my weight and the fact that I wear glasses as soon as I open my eyes. Then it became cruel comments like accusing me of my mother's death and isolating me from anyone who wasn't a member of the church. He didn't want me to spread my bad spirit to other people, but at the end of everything, he was the one who brought the bad energy into the house, and it came in the form of his new girlfriend. They met at an out-of-town work meeting he had, and if I'd known that it was the last peaceful weekend I would have, I probably would have done more than going to Chipotle. My father's girlfriend was a widow, but that was the only thing they had in common. She wasn't religious, she didn't hold herself to any moral pedestal like my dad did, but she didn't drink or smoke. I'd heard her tell him to drop his bottle or cigarette before coming upstairs more than once. And up until the day I had my revenge, I didn't understand what connected them to each other, beyond sleeping with each other of course, and they had a lot of it, loudly. But other than having loud, highly inappropriate sex, my dad and his girlfriend were more different than any two people I've ever met. So you can imagine how surprised I was when he announced that she was moving in a month after they met. And yes, it was an announcement because my dad never suggested anything to me. It was an order or a declaration, nothing in between. And that's when we became three, and life got even worse. I was 17 with zero prospects for college, since my dad said it was expensive enough to feed and house me, and I could work to raise money for college. And I was living with my dad and his girlfriend. I don't know if he was trying to prove a point to her or convince himself of something else, but as soon as she moved in, my dad took his meanness to a new level. He would trash the house every night and wake me up to clean it before he left for work in the morning. And on Bible study days when I slept in, I was woken up with a cigarette burn on my calf. There was nothing ideal about the way I was living, and my dad's girlfriend didn't bother doing anything other than looking the other way while he threw glass cups, remotes, and whatever was close to his reach. And I didn't blame her for not caring, because the first day we met, my dad had gone to pick up some wine for them to share, and I'd told her that I'd killed my mother and she needed to be careful around the house. At the time, I was saying it to protect myself in case she got ideas about it being abusive like my dad. But it had the opposite extreme effect, and she avoided me like the plague. The abuse and negligence continued until I was 18, and I qualified for a scholarship the church organized for part tuition at a college that was about 2 cities away. I had saved up from working tech support at the mall, and I had enough to apply for freshman year. But I couldn't allow myself to feel optimistic for a bright future, or any type of a future, because my dad was evil. And I was right to think so. I broke the news to him one morning, and the first thing he said was, "Why did they choose you?" And I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was an elder in the church, and that meant a lot of the planning and decision passed through his circle of friends. But the scholarship had been organized by former members of the youth body, and they didn't need authorization from the elders when it came to selecting their recipients. I had checked and asked a million questions to be sure that I had a fighting chance before applying in the first place. So I took pride in the fact that I'd successfully done something that didn't involve my dad, and it was something he couldn't control in any way possible. But he found something to control: me. When I didn't answer his question, my dad said, "That's great for you, but I hope you realize that you have to pay me for all the debt you owe." I was confused. Then he explained that I owed him for the 18 years I'd been living in his house for free, and all the groceries he'd paid for, and the gas he used in transporting me everywhere, and everywhere meant to church, and that one time he took me to the hospital when he accidentally pushed me against the staircase, and I had a huge gash on my forehead. When my only response was that, "But you're my dad," he was quick to remind me that it was only on paper, and that gave me the perfect idea for my revenge. I was 18 years old, I didn't have a personal phone, and the only kids my age that liked me were the kids that let me hit their blunts in the bleachers during lunch. All the friends I had in freshman year of high school had left me behind when news of my mom's ending things spread across town. Even at work in the mall, I was never invited for any of the drinks after we close out or watch football at XYZ's house's plans. I was alone, and as you can imagine, I didn't want to be. But my dad's clause was I either paid $10,000 to him every year, or he would report me to the police for theft. I felt lost, but my dad's girlfriend was the one who eventually showed me a way out of the mess that was my life, and she didn't even know it. For all his drinking and abuse and warped approach to religion, my dad was very successful at work, and that meant he could pay off his mortgage and treat himself to a very expensive vintage car that did nothing but sit in the garage. But you get my point. He had money, and she knew it. He He was too drunk out of his mind whenever he was home, but I was sober enough to notice that his checkbook got lighter every time he wiped out for the night, and his girlfriend's knuckles and earlobes spotted more diamonds over the years. The math was quite easy. She was stealing from him every time he blacked out drunk. And because he prided himself on being objective, my dad never accused me of stealing from him because he was right-handed and a change in his signature would have been too obvious. And because he couldn't imagine that his perfect replacement trophy wife-to-be would steal from him, she got away with it. My dad had been trying to get her to marry him for over a year when things went south. She had refused to get baptized in the church, and my dad was too far gone in his obscured idea of religion to marry someone who wasn't baptized. Never mind that he was sleeping with her every other day. So they stayed in a relationship that was going nowhere, and he fooled himself into thinking he was spoiling her when he couldn't even remember half the checks he signed for the spoiling. I was still trying to figure out a way to cut loose from my dad and go to college that summer when he fell ill. It was quick and it was brutal. My 282-pound weighing dad dropped to 150 in about a week after he was diagnosed with chronic bronchitis. He couldn't go to work or do much else, and it didn't take very long for her to leave. She told him that she was going to visit her mother, and she just never came back. But I stayed because he was my dad. I deferred my admission to the fall semester and nursed my dad. I drove him to his hospital appointments and cleaned up after him and made sure he used his meds. And I thought it would convince him to let me go without any financial handcuffs. But I was stupid. He started feeling better 2 months after she left. And I brought up the topic of my college admission and scholarship. And he told me none of that was his business and I only had to stick with his rules. That was the undoing. A debt? After staying by him when he was literally dying? I was furious and I knew it had to end. A debt could be two-way after all. He relapsed 2 months later, and the first thing I did was confirm my enrollment for the fall semester. Then I met up with one of the bleacher kids to buy something heavy and trippy, and after selling them, the boy told me the pills would change my life. He probably meant it casually, but it was literal for me. When I gave my dad his pills that night, none of it was recommended. I told him he could have 1 bottle of beer and it would be our little secret because the doctors made it clear that alcohol would have contradictions with his pills. He was happy to drink after several months, and he told me I was starting to be more like him. And maybe he did something right when he decided to keep me around. I smiled and told him I would never abandon him. But what I didn't add is that I would never abandon him without taking everything I could from him. The moment I made up my mind to get revenge, it was like all the anger I'd pushed back was growing twice as tall. Barely 5 minutes after he used the beer to chase down enough hallucinogens to last a heavy user for a week, my dad was hysterical in his room. And then I got the actual revenge in motion. I used a tracing paper to lift his signature and wrote out a check for $18,000 to myself, one for each year of my miserable life. Then I went to my room and grabbed all the bags I'd packed earlier in the week and threw them into his beloved antique car. I went back inside and calmed him down until he was rocking in a corner of his bed. He looked pitiful, but I had no pity left for him. When he woke up the next morning, I told him his girlfriend had come back looking for him the previous night, and he told her to take his checkbook because he was scared I would do something. The drugs hadn't worn off, and he looked confused, but he nodded along. And then I put the finishing touch on my plan. I got really teary and told him I was never going to be good enough for him, and since his girlfriend had decided to come back, I would get out of his way. Then I told him I would send the first $10,000 before his next hospital appointment. He was still looking dazed, but I could tell that he understood what I said because his wrinkly face was smirking. So I left the house, driving his prized vintage car. It's been 3 years, and the church contacted me a few months ago to tell me that he had died. And I can finally stop looking over my shoulder. What happened here is definitely a lot, but OP, I would say, has been pretty much a tortured soul for a long time. I mean, let alone the treatment from their father, but just being outcast basically from the entire community. I'm definitely not going to endorse what OP did here. but I don't know if it's too crazy considering all the years of things he had to go through up until that point. I stole his movie tickets. My boyfriend and I lived together, but to be honest, it was for economical reasons, not because we decided that we wanted to be closer to each other or that we were in love or any of those romantic reasons. It was purely for the financial benefits. We both met in our final year of college. He wanted to live in the city and I wanted to live in the city too. My boyfriend loves the noise and the rush in the city. He wanted to meet new people and experience them. That was the kind of life he wanted for himself. I didn't care for the noise in the city. If it were left to me, I would choose to live in the suburbs over life in the city, but if I wanted a career for myself, I had to stay in the city. I'm a writer and the chances of getting noticed by a decent publisher were higher if I lived in the city. So when I was leaving college, I knew I had to move to the city. My boyfriend and I have been together for a long time, dating on and off because we were both young people who were too lazy about commitment. We never expressly talked about having a relationship where we could see other people, but we did see other people. I knew he would go on dates with other girls, and he knew about being with other guys too, but we both hardly cared. Sometimes he starts seeing a new girl and he goes off for weeks. Well, to be honest, that's happened to me too. I've met guys who have captured my heart for, say, weeks, but my boyfriend and I would always gravitate towards each other at the end of the day. Just before graduation, we talked about life after graduation and what we would do with our lives after college. My boyfriend said that he wanted to move to the city to enjoy the noise and hustle and bustle, and I wanted to do the same so I can get noticed as a writer, after which I would leave to a less noisy place where I can write and avoid people. The city we wanted to live in was the same, so we decided to live together. It made sense to do that. Living in the city was expensive. Rent and all, we would save a lot of money if we lived together. We had student loans on our necks that we were determined to pay off soon anyway, so we wanted to do anything to cut costs. My boyfriend moved in before me. We found the apartment together and went to inspect it together, but couldn't move in at the same time because I had to travel to see my parents. I stayed at my parents' house for a week and flew back to the city to officially move in with my boyfriend. When I moved in, he said he wanted to talk, but at the time he was very busy settling into his new job, so we barely saw each other for the first week. He returned very late from work, and I would usually be asleep by that time. I do my best work very early in the morning, so I wake up to write very early, and I hated to be distracted when I'm writing. By then, my boyfriend would be going off to work, so we barely had time to talk until the weekend. That weekend, he took me out to dinner and revealed that he wanted to change the dynamics of our relationship. He said we were full adults now, and he would prefer if we stayed committed to each other and not see other people anymore as we did in college. I agreed, but only reluctantly. I didn't think my boyfriend and I were in love enough to be so committed to each other. I definitely cared deeply for him and him for me, but I don't think we were people who could be in a committed, monogamous relationship, especially with each other, and I didn't trust him to keep up with it. It was a tough first year we had adjusting to living together and managing our finances. He worked 2 jobs and both were demanding. He also interned twice a week at a big advertising agency. We hardly saw each other during the week, and even on weekends he got so tired that we hardly had time to talk much or hang out together. Nearly a year after we moved in together, he got a full-time job at the big advertising agency. We were both excited and we went out to celebrate. It was good news because the new position meant good pay, and good pay meant better food in the fridge. Our arrangement worked very well for me. I did some freelance writing here and there while still working on my book. Since I was home most of the time, I had dinner ready when he returned from work, and on weekends we did our grocery shopping together. While I chipped in for rent, my boyfriend took care of food, groceries, and home supplies since he earned a lot more than I did. That way I had more money to save and pay for my student loan. I was happy and so was my boyfriend. He was comfortable with what he had going on. Some months after he started at his new job, my boyfriend got a little happier than usual. I noticed he started paying more attention to how he looked. He bought new perfumes and got a new haircut. I suspected that someone else was in the picture, and I was correct. Someone was in the picture. My boyfriend had his coworker and new friend at work come over for dinner one night, and while I was getting dessert ready, I heard them talking about a lady at work. Her voice is so heavenly, it's like when she starts speaking. I can hardly do anything but listen." They both laughed. "She has a great voice indeed. I suggested to her to consider voice acting when I first met her." "Isn't she too nerdy for that?" my boyfriend asked. "She doesn't have a nerdy voice, I'll tell you that." They laughed again. They stopped talking when I walked into the living room with dessert. When his friend left, I told him I heard a bit of their convo and asked who they were talking about. He was reluctant to tell me who she was, but he eventually spilled. "She's an intern at work. She just finished college, so she interns at the agency. He liked her. I just knew it." I say, "Well, do you like her?" He says, "Nope." I say, "Are you sure about that?" "I've asked my boyfriend if he likes a girl in the past, and he said yes. We were still in college at the time, and the girl was a freshman in his department. We were out with friends when he saw her and walked up to her to say hello. They spoke for a while before he returned, and I watched how he spoke to her. I knew he liked her, and I asked him if he did later that evening when we returned to my room, and he admitted having feelings for her. I wasn't mad or anything. My boyfriend and I were not exclusive, as I mentioned before, but I did feel a little bit of jealousy. I asked if he wanted to do anything about it because he was quite reluctant to provide an answer. I noticed at the time that my boyfriend was usually reluctant to admit that he wanted to or was seeing anyone else, and I didn't understand why. He was trying to pretend we were exclusive. He knew that I occasionally went out with other guys anyway. Again, he lied about not liking the intern when it was quite obvious that he did like her. I said, "If you want to go out with her." "I don't want to," he interrupted me quickly. "I have only eyes for you." I did not believe that. I didn't get to meet this lady until months later when I organized a birthday party for him. His birthday was coming up, and I reached out to his friend from work so we could plan a surprise birthday party for him. His friend helped me invite the coworkers he talked to, and we planned a little party in our apartment. His sister came visiting, so while he was at work, we got the apartment ready for the party. We went out for the evening while the guests arrived at our apartment. His sister texted me when all the guests had arrived, and I made up something about being cold and suggested we go back home. He agreed. My boyfriend was super excited about the party. He and his sister were in the foster care system as children, so they very rarely had birthday parties organized for them. I was happy about his excitement too. He deserved to be happy and had been a great boyfriend too, so I wanted to reward him and make him happy. Just as the party was on, I noticed him talking to a blonde girl. She was drop-dead gorgeous, and I noticed how he paid so much attention to her. He was clearly into her. I didn't think she was the girl I heard him talking about with his coworker until I moved closer to them and he introduced us. Her voice gave her out. She certainly had a heavenly voice and was quite the nerd too. All through the party, he would randomly walk up to her and they would talk and laugh. I was uncomfortable and certain that he liked her. Some days after the party, I walked into our bedroom and caught my boyfriend putting something away. "What are those?" I asked, walking towards him. He quickly hid something in between the pages of a book and said, "Nothing." He met me halfway in the room and hugged me. How smart, I thought. He was hiding something, and I made a mental note to find out what it was later. That evening, he went out with his friends to watch a game, and I went into the room and searched for the book he had hidden something in. My suspicion grew when I couldn't find the book. What was he hiding? I went to his side of the closet and found the book. Right in the middle of the books were 2 movie tickets in a brown envelope. The movie was showing the next evening. At first, I thought the movie tickets were for us, but he knew I didn't like movies. I'm a book person. I'd rather read a book than watch a movie, so it certainly was not for me. He had made me go with him to the cinema several times because he loves watching movies, but I always fell asleep in the cinema. One day he got mad and swore to never go to the movies with me. I didn't care. Watching movies is simply an interest he has that I don't. Sitting through a movie was a chore for me anyway, and I'd rather not. Ever since then, he never asked me to watch a movie with him. If he wasn't going with me, then it had to be a girl. I knew he didn't get tickets to go see a movie with one of the boys. Plus, he was hiding the tickets. That had to mean something. I took the tickets, hid them in the pockets of my jean trousers, and carefully hung them in my closet. Then I found 2 cards lying around, cut them into the sizes of those tickets, and put them in the brown envelope where I'd seen the tickets. That night, my boyfriend and I were talking when his phone rang and he stood to receive the call. "Work," he whispered to me and stepped out onto the balcony. I could see him from the living room, and it certainly was not a call from work. He was smiling and flirting with whoever he was talking to. It had to be the intern from work. I was sure of it, but I didn't care. I'd ruined their plans for the next night already. I wasn't surprised when the next day, he lied about needing to go into the office to handle some leftover work from the week before. I have to get it done before Monday, he said, wearing a big denim jacket. I saw that he had folded the brown envelope in his jacket pocket, and I smiled to myself. Immediately he left. I called an old friend and told her I've got 2 tickets to a movie. They say, since when do you enjoy going to the movies? I say, since today. Are you down? They say, sure. I hurriedly got dressed. She came over to the apartment, and we drove to the cinema. Just as we were driving in, I saw my boyfriend's car drive out of the mall. I was pleased. I had ruined his plans for the evening. We went to the cinema and had fun. I didn't like movies, but interestingly, I enjoyed the movie and had a good time at the cinema. When I returned home, my boyfriend was asleep on the couch, but he woke up as soon as he heard me. How did work go? I asked, smiling. I know what you did. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about and walked away. He followed me into the bedroom. I said, it was you who said you wanted to be exclusive. He sighed and said, I'm sorry. I promise it wasn't a date. She knows about you. She met you at my birthday party. I say, oh, it's the girl with the heavenly voice, right? He says, I'm sorry, I slipped. I'm really sorry. I didn't speak to him at all through that weekend and the next week. I was pissed that he would ask us to be exclusive and still sneak around behind my back. The most annoying thing was that he lied to me. He didn't have to do that. We could have continued with our relationship dynamics. We ended up talking about it. I suggested we go back to how our relationship used to be, but he declined. He wanted an exclusive relationship and promised to keep that this time. I agreed to his terms, but not until he told me what happened on his would-have-been date. Apparently, when he got to the mall, he pulled out the brown envelope and saw what I had done. He told her he had to return home, and she was pissed and wouldn't even speak to him again. My question is, unless this is like a movie debut and like the theater is full, why not just like save face and walk in there and buy another couple tickets? Probably because they knew they'd been caught. But considering this guy has already had a history of sleeping around with other people and tried to go already behind OP's back once and couldn't even hardly fess up to it until it was totally exposed, do you think OP's making a major mistake giving them another chance? I'd like to know what you guys think down in the comments below. That said, our final story of the day is I ruined my sister's sleepover. My twin sister and I are in the same friendship circle and have a great relationship now. But things weren't always this way. We fought a lot growing up and were practically enemies. She's all mature, calm, and collected now, but she used to be very annoying and bratty. She antagonized me all the time and somehow deluded herself into thinking she was older than me. She managed to fool everyone at school too. My sister genuinely believed she was my older sister. And yeah, she's older, but only by a few minutes. I was a scrawny little boy as a teenager, but my sister grew at a faster rate. She was taller, pretty, and was the typical beautiful, popular girl in high school movies. She was one of the most popular in school too, and one of her best friends was the most popular girl in school. Her mom was a celebrity at the time, a famous TV show actress. My sister was obsessed with being and staying the cool girl in school that she avoided me, who was at the time a geek who spent all of his time in the library and science club. She didn't deny that I was her brother, but she hated people knowing we were twins. She would often tell everyone that I was her baby brother. Boy, that pissed me off. Also, she was our parents' favorite. Our parents deny it, but they loved her more, especially my dad. She was and still is his favorite child. Before I ruined her all-girls sleepover, she did some things that pissed me off, and ruining her sleepover was how I got my revenge. My dad had strict rules about us playing certain video games in the house, but my new friends from the swim team I had just joined in school came over and wanted to play. I was grateful enough to have those guys even come over to my house. They were the cool kids, and I wanted more than anything to stay friends with them, so I welcomed playing those video games. My sister walked in on us playing and having fun, but I didn't think she would rat me out to our parents. Well, she did. One day, my parents were on the balcony talking when my sister walked past them in a short skirt. "Where do you think you're going dressed like that?" my mom queried. My sister, in her usual mannerism, rolled her eyes and frowned. "Mom, it's just a skirt. It's a skirt that you won't be wearing out of this house." My mom turned to my dad. "Tell her." My dad sighed and said, "Honey, that skirt is too short. You know the rules." My sister frowned and turned to go back into the house, but before that, she told my dad that I'd played violent video games in the house and disobeyed the rules. Yes, she did accompany the rules with air quotes. There was no reason for her to do that. She knew how my dad felt about such video games, but she had a habit of trying to get me into trouble with our parents whenever she was in trouble. My dad was furious and disappointed in me. He took things like that seriously, and he would never tolerate violent video games. He just never understood that sometimes it was just a game and nothing more. As a psychologist, he believed violent video games subconsciously encouraged boys to be violent. My dad grounded me for 2 days, and while I was grounded, one of the guys from the swim team had a party. I couldn't attend, so naturally I fell off their good graces and went back to not having cool friends. Maybe now I wouldn't be concerned with friends like those, but as a teenager, that hurt me, and I blamed my dad and sister for blowing up my chances. My sister's friend, the one whose mom was an actress, planned a sleepover for their clique, and my sister could not shut up about it. She went on and on about how it was going to be perfect and how they were going to have a lot of fun. I was jealous of the fact that she regularly had a lot of fun and enjoyed a very healthy social life. All through that week, she looked forward to hanging out with her friends at their big house that weekend. Unfortunately for the girls, their friend's mom had already planned a party for the cast of a TV show she starred in at the time. The girls were livid and their mood dampened. My sister moped around the house looking all sad and frustrated. My mom then came up with a bright idea. She told my sister that the girls could have their sleepover at our house. My sister was reluctant to ask her friends at first. While our house was not particularly small, it was certainly not anywhere close to the size of my sister's friend's house. I was sure that the girls would prefer to hang out at the other girls' big house than at ours. I laughed and said there was no way the girls would choose to have their dream sleepover at our house. "Shut up," my sister yelled at me and threw some of the cereal from her cereal bowl at me. I said, "Hey, stop it, Mom." My mom rolled her eyes. "Come on, don't throw food at your brother," she said weakly. My sister ran upstairs to break the news that our mom had offered them a spot for their sleepover in our house to her friends. I continued my laughter. "Seriously, shut up," my mom shouted at me. I stopped laughing and shrugged. "Mom, you know there's no way that they'll come here for their grand sleepover, right?" She says, "We don't know that. Plus their friends bailed on them. They don't have any other option. Beggars can't be choosers." "Yo," I called out to my sister from the dining table. "Mom said your friends are beggars." My mom threw her food at me too. "Hey," I yelled, wiping soggy flakes from my face. "Shut up, sore loser," my sister screamed from the top of the stairs. She hurried down excitedly. "My friends agreed. We're gonna have our sleepover here," she squealed. She hugged my mom and did a little dance while my mom gave me the "I told you so" face. My parents were leaving for a wedding in a different state the next day, so they made us a promise to behave ourselves properly while they were away and left. As I watched my sister arrange her room for the sleepover, a revenge plan came to my mind. I almost fell over in laughter when I thought of it. I honestly didn't set out to carry out revenge on my sister for her bratty attitude and for telling on me and making my parents so mad at me, but since I was bored to death and had nothing planned for the whole day, all thanks to her, I thought that I might just as well have fun ruining her girls' night. I felt justified about my plans since she was one of the major reasons I had nothing to do that day. Just as the first friend arrived, I lied to my sister that I was leaving for a party. I was even all dramatic and got dressed. She was happy to know that she and her friends would have the whole house to themselves for most of the night. "Great, now I get to host my friends properly without you getting in the way," she said, twirling her hair around her finger and rolling her eyes at me. I just smiled and left her to answer the door. When she and her friend were in her room, I tiptoed to my room and quietly shut the door behind me. From my room, I heard her friends come in one by one, and I heard how they all got excited when the queen of their clique came in. The one whose mom was an actress was the queen. They all fell over themselves to please her, and in return, she allows them a glimpse into her life. For instance, she's allowed the girls to play dress up in their mother's walk-in closet. First they played music, danced, and laughed in the living room. Then later in the night, they all went into my sister's bedroom. It was my time to carry out my plan of disrupting her precious sleepover. I went out of the house through my room's window and climbed up a short ladder to her room's window. The ladder was short, so I could make sounds that would infiltrate her room, but it wasn't long enough that any of them could see me without looking down. I started to make eerie sounds. The girls were talking and laughing, so they could barely hear my eerie sounds. Some seconds into my consistent eerie noise making, I heard one of the girls ask, "Can you guys hear that?" I stopped. "Hear what?" I heard my sister ask. The girls all went silent so they could hear what the girl heard. "I don't hear anything," one of the girls said. "Yeah, me neither," my sister corroborated. "I'm sure I heard something," the first girl insisted. I almost started laughing. I wanted to scare them, but now they were arguing. Two of the girls said they heard me. The first girl insisted that she heard something, and my sister, who was probably irritated that the girl was ruining their night together, kept reiterating that there was no noise. "Well, I heard something. Maybe someone's trying to prank us by making funny noises." "The only one who could do that would be my brother, and he's not even home," my sister replied. "Why do you girls never listen to me?" the girl asked. She sounded like she was in tears. She went on to say that if the actress's daughter had said she heard something, everyone would listen to her. "Why are you being such a witch? Stop making this about you. Gosh, we did not hear the noise," the actress's daughter yelled. "Don't call me a witch. You're the self-centered one. We spent weeks planning for this night, and you didn't even take this seriously enough to check with your mom." As I descended from the ladder, I heard my sister trying to calm the girls down and diffuse the situation. I waited down the ladder until they were done arguing. This took a while. When it looked like it was all good, I climbed up the ladder and made my eerie sound again. I'm talented at making weird sounds. I could sound like animals and mimic many other sounds, so my eerie noise sounded very real. This time all the girls heard. "What is that?" one of the girls asked. She was afraid. "I heard that too," another girl said. "Call for help." "Don't be dramatic," my sister chided. I made the sound again. My sister called out my name twice. "I know it's you. I swear to God, I'm going to call Dad." "Who is that?" one of the girls asked her. "My brother. I'm sure he's the one who's been making that funny noise." "I thought you said he was out attending a party." She says, "That's what I thought. He probably returned early to disrupt my night." "Why would he do that?" one of the girls asked. I was sure it was the girl who heard me the first time because it sounded like she was crying again. My sister says, "I don't know, he's weird." I couldn't help laughing, so I chuckled softly and climbed down the ladder. "I suggest we move to the living room. Seems like there's a ghost making weird noises in your room," one of the girls suggested. The other girls agree. I quietly climbed back into my room from the window. In my room, I hear the girls moving downstairs. They were already talking and laughing again. I grinned. I had another plan mapped out, and I could not wait to carry it out. When the girls were in my sister's room trying to get stuff out, I sneaked out into the kitchen so it looked like I was just coming in. "Hey, was that you making weird noises at my bedroom's window?" my sister asked immediately after she saw me. "No, I don't know what you're talking about," I said with a straight face. "And quite frankly, I'm not interested. I just returned from an actual adult party that I enjoyed, and I'm not interested in discussing girls playing around in their underwear." My sister gave me a sharp look and shook her head. "You better not try to ruin this for me." Our parents had a carton of beer in the fridge, and I took a bottle out and took a sip. "Maybe you girls need a little alcohol to chill out." She looked at me skeptically, snatched the bottle from my hands, and walked away. I hoped that she would share the drinks with her friends. Turns out she did, because when I came down to the kitchen to drink water, the living room smelled of alcohol. She had opened the other bottles in the fridge and shared them with her friends. I was quite dedicated to my revenge missing that I set an alarm just in case I dozed off. It was my only chance to get back at my sister, and I was not about to ruin the fun for myself. Not quite long after, the girls' voices become more hushed. I fell asleep but was soon awoken by my alarm. I opened my drawer and picked out my permanent marker. I was happy. It was time to get to business. I snuck into the living room where the girls were sleeping and drew straight lines on their faces with my marker. They were all very tired and had drunk alcohol, so they turned and twisted but didn't notice that someone had come in or felt the marker on their faces. I drew on 4 of the girls, including my sister, and left the actress's daughter's face bare, so everyone would think she did it. I snuck back to my room and went to sleep. The next morning, all the girls were mad at the girl whose face I left bare. "She's always been a total witch," I heard one of the girls exclaim. My sister knew it was me, so she tried to explain to the girls that I did it, but they weren't listening to her. They kept fighting and bringing up old wrongs. I was in my room all the while, enjoying their arguments. I dared not leave my room though. My sister would have had the girls beat me up. My sister did not forgive me for what I did for a long time. The funny thing is about this story is the friends all had their own narrative that they're completely agreed upon, committed to. So like there's no incentive from the sister to reveal the truth and drag OP into it, so OP kind of just got away with it. That said, I feel like OP got very lucky because I feel like this could have gone wrong. They slip on the ladder, they actually just go out and investigate, they call the cops, or one of them isn't as tipsy, didn't drink, they wake up, they see everything, you know? I bashed my best friend's car. My best friend and I have been friends since I was 3 and he was 2. I was born in December and he in February, so for a few months every year we were the same age. I don't have any siblings and our parents always joked that he was my brother, but I seriously thought so too. I even tried convincing him to change his last name to mine, but luckily our parents found out and it wasn't like we could do anything about it at preschool, and that's pretty much how it's been our entire lives. I suggest the dumbest ideas and he goes along with it, and I'm not even ashamed to admit that I enjoy our dynamics. But then he started changing. He didn't want to do any of the weird things I think up, like having a popsicle on a Ferris wheel or having a barbecue party with only barbecue and no sides. And it all started when he went to college. My best friend Mark is really smart, and he's so smart he almost got sent to one of those gifted kids schools when he was 7, but his mom's refusal was final. And I like to think my 1-week protest was helpful in avoiding that. But anyway, Mark is really smart. And when we were juniors in high school, he got offered a bunch of AP classes that, combined with his athletic swimming skills, meant he could graduate a year early. Of course, he aced his exams and bagged all the credits he needed, and then some extra just for the fun of it. And before what I knew what was happening, our circle of 2 became a single line of 1. Things just went downhill from that point. Before I continue though, let me point out that I'm heterosexual. So this wasn't the case of, ooh, a crush on your best friend or anything like that. I'd asked some of the people who were in a school band with me and they confirmed that they did feel strange when their siblings left for college, and that totally made sense. So I knew what I felt wasn't out of place. And like they said, I just had to wait till he was back for a break and it would be like he never left. But then he returned a few months after resuming college, and nothing was the same after that. Mark had a roommate, and he told me a few weeks after he moved into the dormitories that his roommate was cool. Just that, cool, and we never spoke about the mysterious roommate ever again. Then Mark came to town to spend a week after his mom's birthday, and guess who came along? Steve, the roommate. And I didn't even know he was coming, so I'd planned an entire weekend for the 2 of us to catch up. But I brought my casserole my mom made to Mark's house when he called to let me know that he'd arrived. And who did I see helping his mom cut potatoes? Steve. And I didn't even realize who he was because I'd never seen his picture. Until Mark's mom said, "Steve dear, make them a bit thicker. They're for fries, not salad." And he gave her a wink that made her laugh. It was my confused Steve that got everyone in the kitchen's attention, and Mark's mom rushed over to kiss my cheek and tell me thanks for her birthday gift. I'd helped her repaint her workspace in their backyard, but I couldn't hug her back properly because I was too busy staring at the intruder. And then Mark's mom said, "You know Steve, right?" But I didn't know Steve. Yet he shook my hand and I tried not to flinch at how firm his grip was. Then Mark came downstairs and I forgot that Steve was giving me the side eye. For the rest of the evening, I tried to start a conversation with Steve because we were sitting side by side, and Mark was across from us, but he either pretended not to hear me or outrightly ignored what I said by starting a different conversation with someone else on the table. Mark's sister noticed and gave me a questioning look, but I shrugged and shook my head. As I was heading home, I told Mark I had plans for us to hang out the next day, but before I could get a word out, Steve popped out from behind him and said, "Mark, don't forget about the tour you promised me tomorrow." Then Mark went on an explanation of how Steve had never been anywhere except New York, where their college was, and he was excited to be in Ohio and see our town. And then Mark had the brilliant idea that we could all hang out after he and I showed Steve around town. I didn't want to hang out with Steve. He hadn't mentioned that Steve was coming, but for some reason, mostly the fact that I wanted to catch up with my best friend, I agreed. And it was the stupidest decision I've ever made. I've heard about relationships falling out when one partner goes away to college, but for a friendship that we've had for over 15 years, I didn't want to believe it. Not so soon anyway. But the things that happened that weekend certainly convinced me. When we met up for lunch the next day, they'd already ordered a platter that they were sharing. And as soon as I saw the content, I paused. It was seafood. I have a shellfish allergy, and Mark knows this because he was the one who brought me an EpiPen when I accidentally ate a taco that had shrimp in it. So I was wondering why they were having a seafood platter. Mark said Steve's favorite food was seafood and he didn't mind it, and I could just order something else, since there was no point in having 3 different orders, but 2 was okay? I was already feeling frustrated about the whole situation, but that just escalated how I felt about that. I zoned out for about an hour while they goofed off about things they'd seen. Yes, they started the tour before I got there, and when I couldn't stand it again, I decided to leave them to bro it out. And Mark didn't question why I left. I ran into Mark's sister as I was leaving the restaurant, and she told me she was worried about Mark's friendship with Steve, but she didn't want to intrude. I had nothing to say because I could barely sit through a conversation with them. And I didn't want Mark's sister to think I was jealous, and I totally was. It felt like I was losing my best friend, and I couldn't do anything about it. But a part of my mind reminded me that I was making assumptions and I needed to try to get to know Steve better. Mark was my friend, and if Mark liked him, there had to be a good reason. I just had to find the reason. For the rest of the week they spent in town, Mark tried to get me to hang out with Steve, but I didn't want to expose myself to any more uncomfortable situations, and I decided to avoid them. On their last day, I offered to drive them to the airport because I wasn't entirely mad at Mark, just the company that he was hanging out with. The entire trip, Steve wouldn't shut up. Mark, remember when we did? Hey Mark, when we get to New York, Mark, do you think you'd still be able to spend Christmas at mine? And it was the last one that really drove the point in. If I had suspected it, then I knew it for certain. I had lost my best friend in less than 4 months, and there was nothing I could do about it. Fast forward to New Year's and Mark and Steve were in town. It officially became Mark and Steve for everything. Mark and Steve moved into a new apartment. Mark and Steve completed exams and decided to take a trip to Canada. Mark and Steve booked their flight. Mark and Steve were landing in 5 hours. After what happened the last time they were in town, I wasn't too excited about seeing either of them, especially Mark, who had decided that answering my texts was too much work a few weeks back and resorted to once-a-month calls. A few days after they got to town, I told Mark to come hang out at the skate park with some of our mutual friends from high school, and I specifically told him to bring Steve along. They got to a park about an hour after the time we decided, and they looked like they'd just come off a Ferris wheel, winded and happy. I was having fun with the other people at the park, so it didn't bug me too much, but when I went over to greet them, I heard Steve whisper ask Mark, "Why do you like dork crap so much? Skating?" And I expected Mark to defend it or say something, but he just laughed and shoved Steve. By the time I got to them, they were still laughing. I didn't ask why and they didn't say anything, but I saw Mark look uncomfortable when I asked if he wanted to rent a board and do a few tricks with the rest of us. "Maybe next time," that's what he said. And Steve shoved them and they were laughing again. I shrugged it off and skated for about an hour. Then we went to get dinner before they headed back to Steve's parents' house. And by the next day, all heck was loose. One of my friends sent me a link to a funny video he found on a crap post Reddit community, and it stopped me in my tracks. It was a recording of me the previous day at the park, and the only way I knew it was me was because I saw my sneakers. Every other part of me had been edited as a turkey that was dripping filling and sauce all over the park, with everyone else edited out of the park. It would have been hilarious if I didn't know exactly who had done it. The same person who told the entire table at Mark's mom's birthday dinner that he was in his second year of a film production degree. Steve. The angle the video was shot in made complete sense, and I didn't have to think twice about confronting Steve, but it didn't feel right to do without letting Mark know. After all, there was no way I could meet Steve without Mark knowing, so I called Mark and asked if he was home, before going straight there. As soon as I stepped in, I saw Mark and Steve was nowhere in sight. That was perfect. I showed Mark the video, and he was laughing so hard his eyes started tearing up. Then he said, "It cracks me up every time." And I knew that he knew about the video, because I'd only shown it to him once. So I didn't bother beating about the bush and I just asked directly, "Did you know Steve did this?" And he said he did. Steve thought it would be funny since Thanksgiving was only a few weeks gone, so it seemed like the Thanksgiving turkey was skating around after being left behind at the store. That explanation didn't make any sense to me because it seemed like I was literally the turkey who was left behind, but it had been enough for Mark to help Steve out with the stupid video and encourage him to post it. When I asked about my reputation and the possibility of someone seeing it, Mark said that's why he told Steve to make the turkey larger, so that nothing that could bring the attention to me would be in the video. And that's when I showed him the shoes I had on, which were the exact same pair I had on in the video. Then his mouth went, "Oh," and he apologized for skipping that, but still thought it was funny. I was beyond upset. Not only was I losing my best friend, but the person getting my place was mean with all the potential of being a bully. If he thought that was funny, then it seemed only right to actually give them something to laugh about. I texted Mark just as I got to my house and told him that the video wasn't a big deal and that Steve actually seemed cool. He was glad that I was willing to get along because Steve felt like I didn't like him. Wonder why? I told Mark we should take Steve to this cool new VR game/laser tag place in the city, and he was game for it. He drove us in his mom's car, and while we were signing in, they had us drop all valuables at the check-in point to avoid losing items in the tag arena. And since I'd booked it, we were the party of my name. About 30 minutes into the game, I excused myself, faking an upset stomach from all the running around. Then I went to the check-in point, provided ID, and got the keys to the car. Then I took it for a quick drive down the road, and I may or may not have scraped the sides before returning it to the parking spot. We had fun, I made them laugh. Then, as it got very dark, I suggested we leave so we could all get enough rest before the New Year's party the next day. And I told Steve I think he should drive and show us how us New York natives do it. He was more than eager to take charge, and when I suggested that he get us a drink with his ID card, he had no objections. We were not getting any rest if I had anything to say about it. Steve bought the vodka. I suggested a game. 2 truths and a lie. The only person who would be getting drunk would be Mark. He had no sense of lies, and I knew that because I was his best friend, and it was equal parts proof and revenge. Steve was surprised every time Mark failed to guess an obvious lie, and I smiled more with every shot Mark downed. Steve remained quite clear-headed, as I hoped, and drove us back to Mark's place. I faked being more drunk than I was and slumped across the couch opposite Steve and Mark, who were sprawled on each other on the floor. Mark's mom's shout of his name woke us all up with a start, and when my head cleared, I felt oddly satisfied. The last thing Mark would remember is Steve driving us. After all, he hadn't remembered telling me to marry his sister so we could be family when we got drunk off cans of beers at 13. There was no way he was remembering this. Steve looked confused as Mark's mom went on and on about the scratch on the side of her car, and I just stood there not saying anything. Mark, who was obviously hungover, kept repeating that he didn't drink and drive. Steve drove us, and I agreed completely. Then I offered Mark's mom a repaint job to help her out, and she immediately calmed down. I was a sweetheart, and Steve was welcome to stay the rest of the trip, but he had to be more careful. For someone who had tried to embarrass me on the internet, I'd one-up Steve by setting him up for dragging by Mark's mom. It was the best New Year's I'd had in a while. Although OP might have one-up Steve in this situation, was OP really a winner here, going and damaging his friend's mom's car? Like, do you think stepping away from the situation, OP can actually just feel good about it? I don't know if I would. I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is, am I the jerk for making my wife homeless? As a young kid, I used to hear tales of men being horrible to their wives, and it frightened me into wanting to be a better man. My father was the sweetest man to my mother, and so were my uncles to their wives. There was no role model directly around me that was outrightly a jerk. so I modeled my life after them. I'm a 47-year-old man, and my now ex-wife Paula is 45. We have 3 children between us, a son I'll call P, 22, and twin daughters Daisy and Poppy, 20. These are all fake names, but the ages are real. I love my family very much. I met my wife for the first time when I was 13. My family went to a water park and she tried to drown me as a joke. Then I met her again at 21, a month before graduating from college, and this time I kept in touch with her. She was feisty and wild and kept me on my toes. The perfect match for a quiet and reserved man like me. We got into a relationship and got hitched when she turned 22, having our first kid barely 1 year later. I've always been a family man, so I adopted the stereotypical role of providing for my family, working my butt off every day and being the best dad possible. Paula had always been lazy. Sometimes I would get back from work and see the house dirty and the kids with their homework undone. At the time, I saw Paula as a perfect woman who could do no wrong. So I also helped out with the kids and the house as much as I could. They were my kids after all. What bothered me was the fact that my wife did not work and still did not take proper care of our toddler son and 1-year-old twins. I loved her enough to accept that it was probably a temporary fix that would be over soon. Soon turned into almost 10 years, and then I lost my job. The company I worked at closed overnight, sending its workers home with their salaries doubled as an apology for packing up with no explanations. I was properly depressed when I got home, and when I let my wife know what was up, she suddenly withdrew from me. Our suffering sex life turned non-existent, and Paula was always just mean to me. Instead of taking it to heart, I poured my everything into taking care of my kids. They favored me over their mother because I was generally nicer, paid more attention to them, and cooked nicer meals. Paula's favorite dinner was frozen pizza, frozen meatloaf on a good Sunday. Paula was home less and less after I lost my job. Any questions to where she was going ended up in yelling matches and breaking things. All of these frightened my kids, so I avoided them like the plague. I didn't want to admit to myself or anyone that my marriage was failing. At barely 8 and 10, my 3 kids already started talking to me about wanting me to have better than their mother. It hurt me greatly that my young, preteen children knew what a divorce was and wanted me to get one from their mother. Thinking back, my kids had a point, but I was desperate to save my family. I decided to take matters into my own hands and confront my wife about our relationship. I gave the kids to my mother for the weekend, made a lovely dinner with wine for my wife, and used up nearly all of my savings for flowers and a new handbag she'd been talking about getting with a friend of hers. She was in a good enough mood, so after dinner, we spoke at length about the financial situation of our family and how we'll progress. It was then that she let the cat out of the bag that she'd recently got into some acting work with a friend of hers, and she intended to take it. It would make her good enough money, but she would also need to be away more than she already was. Obviously, this didn't sit right with me. As it stood, I was already raising the kids on my own. I asked her if there was another alternative, and she looked me dead in the eye and said that I had to make double what she stood to make from her acting job. The very next day, after dropping my kids off at school, I also went in and applied for a job as a janitor. Because of my experience with woodworking, they offered me a job as a woodwork assistant for the Nature Club. It didn't pay nearly as much as my wife's acting job, but combined with the other things I did during the weekends, I made enough to put good food on the table again. Somehow, while being married, I became a single parent, working my butt off while Paula did whatever she wanted to do. My children are the best, and they were super understanding as they helped in whatever ways that they could, even getting jobs like babysitting the neighbor's kids and doing random cleaning. For the record, I had no idea that they got these jobs until my birthday when they surprised me with a brand new chainsaw. Over the span of 7 years, I got and lost so many jobs. It was like the universe was against me. With every job I lost, Paula seemed to be more elated, rubbing it in my face that I would never make as much money as she. It was a little suspicious, but I wasn't surprised. By now, I'd given up on fixing whatever it was that we had. When our first son turned 18, Paula gave me divorce papers, announcing that she was finally sick of our awful marriage. I had been expecting it for quite some time, but it still hurt a bit. In nearly 3 generations of family, I was the first to get a divorce. Despite my family and kids doing everything to make me feel better, I couldn't shake off the feeling of disappointment of being unable to save my marriage. After Paula gave me the papers, she went MIA for a few weeks. I started to feel better, spending time with my kids more. They seemed happier and it made me happy too. Unexpectedly, after barely a month had passed, Paula literally crawled back, begging for a second chance. It shocked me, but she was quivering and in tears. In all the years I'd known Paula, she had never cried that much. I was concerned for her, and obviously I'm not a monster, so I let her back in and informed my kids. My son was just heading off to college, so it was just the twins, myself, and Paula. For the first few days, she tried pretending nothing was weird or suspicious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. After a week of being back home, I cornered her and asked her to speak up about the real reason she moved back home. She broke down and narrated to me that the acting gig that she'd been doing for the past couple of years was really sex work. One man in particular paid her to hook up with whomever he chose for his private collection. It was a little strange to hear, and I was taken aback. Nearly 25 years together, and I was finding out after we almost divorced that my wife was a sex worker. I kept my composure and asked her to go on. And she had no idea that the man had a family with children because he asked her to move in with him, and she did. This was the reason why she was barely home and wanted a divorce. Unfortunately, his biological family that he'd been neglecting finally caught up to him and raided his home, finding all of her tapes and threatening to expose her. She called their bluff, and they sold a few copies to a sex shop. The reason why she came back home was to minimize the damage control that was definitely going to happen at a point. I was beyond stunned that I had to leave the house and take a long walk. When I returned, she had made dinner and cleaned up my bedroom, begging that we talked because she had some more to tell me. As a man who's just been dealt a great deal of devastating information, there's only so much you can do, so I agreed, wanting to get as much as I could out of the way. We were nearly divorced anyway, and it seemed like the worst of it had passed. Boy, was I wrong. I was halfway through dinner when she started to speak about my job crisis over the past couple of years. My appetite immediately disappeared, and I asked her very nicely not to talk about it as it was a sore spot for me. She asked me to be patient and continued to speak. I had the good mind to get up and walk out, and I was already on my way out of the living room when she yelled and said that it was all her fault, that I'd not been able to get a good enough job. I asked her to explain herself as calmly as she could, and she started with some buttering up, telling me how much of a good husband and father I was, and how she always knew I would achieve whatever I put my mind to. At this point, I was livid already and asked her to cut it out and explain herself. That was when she admitted to writing to my places of work that I was either suffering from mental troubles and wasn't allowed to work, posing as my caretaker. It hurt worse because if she didn't admit it, I would never know. Most of the places I laid off from did it very kindly, explaining they couldn't carry as much staff anymore. I asked why she did it, and she admitted to not wanting me to earn double the amount she made from her acting job so that she wouldn't have to stop. It felt as if she ripped away everything that made me feel like a man for her own selfish gain. And it was incredibly depressing to come to terms with the fact that she was just a terrible human. That night, I bawled my eyes out in the bathroom for a long time, before coming to the resolution that no matter how much of a pacifist that I was, Paula was truly a wicked woman who needed to be taught a lesson. The first thing I did the next day was to call up a lawyer, explaining everything that happened and asking for advice. Next, I penned a note to her and my family, letting them know in detail everything that I'd discussed with Paula, and how I would not be associating with her anymore. Then, I served her with my own divorce papers, since hers had been declared null and void. There was a lot of crying and begging from her, but I was completely desensitized to her tactics and only wanted the worst for her. I shielded my kids from the drama, keeping the twins with their grandparents and asking my son to spend Christmas and New Year's with them as well. The court case was messy and expected to drag out for a good long while. Paula tried to fight back with pitiful excuses and a shabby lawyer, but she got tried for defamation of character and was ordered to write a note to every place that she spoke badly about me and to tell them the truth. She also had to pay me a particular sum of money in a month's time, or she would need to go to jail. Being flat out broke and out of acting meant that she had to take matters into her own hands and sell tapes of herself to pay me back. I enjoyed feeling the cold hard cash in my hands, I'll tell you that. Our divorce proceedings went on after that, and I officially kicked her out of the house with everything that she ever owned. I sold the place and moved cities with my twin girls just in time for college, and last I heard of her, she was homeless. It's been 2 years since, and my first son is finished with college. We're currently working on building our own company together. This time, it won't be screwed over by a selfish woman. So after everything, ending up homeless, considering what job they did for most of their adult life, do you feel bad at all for this lady? Or do you feel like it's something they deserved and you have no pity for them? I'd like to know what you guys think in the comments down below. My stepfather gives me drugs. Horror stories about parents on the internet are never ending. While they are saddening, I believe that they serve as cautionary tales for future generations. My story is a little different, and maybe also a little funny whenever I think about it. I'm a 26-year-old male, and I was the first son in a family of 7. 3 boys, 2 girls, and 2 parents. We became 5 after we lost our father and my twin brother to a workplace accident. To date, I feel guilty about the fact that I only survived because I was being naughty and hiding from both my father and brother. They were struck by a truck when they crossed the road, and I watched the entire thing happen. I was about 6 years old when this happened, and my mother became a widow and had to raise 5 kids on her own, the youngest being barely a few weeks old. Young as I was, I understood that things were no longer what they used to be, and I did my best to stay out of her way and take care of my younger siblings the best that I could. I was forced to grow up literally months after I turned 6 because of the situation at home. Despite it all, my mother was still as kind as ever to us, taking her time after working double shifts during the day to go through homework with me and my siblings and tuck us into bed before she would go for an extra shift at night. At the time, we had no idea, but she also worked as an exotic dancer on weekends too, just to make ends meet. For about 2 years, she worked alone to keep us warm, fed, and happy. Till one evening, she brought someone home who she introduced to us as her new friend that was going to be coming around a lot. Instinctively, my younger siblings were adverse to him because he was still a stranger, and even though it was subtle at the time, he was disrespectful to our mom. As the oldest, I had to be nice and put on my best behavior to show my siblings that he was harmless. And he was, in the beginning. We'll call him Tim. Tim was in his late 40s, about 10 years older than my mother, and he was just a regular old man. He liked fishing, and would often take my brother and me alongside him, giving us bags full of bait that he would need to throw at the fish. Tim worked as a bouncer at some prestigious nightclub or event center, so he made some reasonable money, and because he worked mostly at night, he usually helped to take things off Mom's hands by offering to babysit us while she worked. When we were around him, he openly said bad words around us, smoking and offering us beer around his friends, who were also big burly men that had no idea how to act around kids. When I turned 10, my mother got married to Tim in a small church by our house, and it was just us, her kids, and some of Tim's buddies. I was excited to have a full family again. Sure, I still missed my father and brother terribly, but being a kid meant that I got teased for having just one parent, who was barely even present for school events because of how much she worked. Tim worked a little less during the day, and the thought of him being around for father-son and father-daughter events excited me more than anything. Within weeks of becoming our stepfather, Tim insisted that we call him Dad. Threw out nearly all the old pictures of our dead father that still hung around the house in the garage, and threatened to hit anyone who would bring them back into the house. We knew he was a pretty aggressive person, but having him be openly violent to us was a little different from what we were used to. Over the next few years, Tim grew more and more violent. He drank all the time, went out for days on end, and always reeked of alcohol and marijuana. The only advantage of having him around was that he paid some of the bills at home, enabling our mom to drop a few of her jobs and work on taking one full-time one. To her, Tim was the perfect man, big and strong enough to protect her and her 5 kids, and mean enough to send people running at just the sight of him. When I was about 16, both of my little sisters were about 12 and 10, and they had started to go very quiet and reserved. Anyone who has little sisters knows that they're the loudest and most annoying creatures on earth. I noticed their silence for a while, and it took a lot of poking for them to admit that our stepfather Tim had started spanking their bare butts whenever they did something wrong. This obviously didn't sit right with me, and I brought the matter to my mother, letting her know that it wasn't very appropriate. She argued, telling me that he was also their parent, so it wasn't bad that he disciplined them. After a lot of back and forth, she finally agreed to speak to him. Barely even 2 days later, I returned from school to find Tim in the garage, taking apart my late father's motorcycle, one of the few things that he had left us. I was waiting until I turned 18 to begin riding it, and here Tim was, dismantling it as if it were a Lego. I ran in to stop him, and he grabbed me by the collar, beginning to beat me up and calling me a snitch. Imagine a huge, 6-foot-tall, 50-something-year-old beating up a 16-year-old. For someone as drunk as he was also incredibly strong, hurting me until I passed out. When I woke up later, my mother was cleaning up my wounds, cussing me out for upsetting Tim. After this encounter, all four of us, my siblings and I, became deathly afraid of him, steering completely clear of him. Our mom didn't care much, saying that we just didn't know how to act around her dear husband, and that she was the only one who could really handle him. It wasn't until he struck her over his too salty dinner, that tasted perfectly fine by the way, that she knew he wasn't controllable. He was just a monster. Verbal abuse got worse. Tim cussed at my brother for playing tennis, calling him gay for playing a woman's sport. In some twisted way, he praised me for playing basketball, a much manlier sport. He forced us all to go fishing with him and his friends, laughing when they said inappropriate things about my very underage sisters. At 17, I finally opened up one of the bags of bait that we were usually told to hold on, to find bags of neatly packaged white substance powder. I had no idea what it was and alerted my brother about it. We stole one of the small bags and went home, experimenting among both ourselves with what could be in the bag. It was the first time we ever got high, and it was terrible. My heart beat so quickly that I genuinely thought I was going to die. My 15-year-old brother passed out cold, going straight to sleep and waking up almost 24 hours later, while the opposite happened to me. I was wide awake with a palpitating heart for almost 48 hours, only passing out when my worried mother gave me a glass of warm milk and honey. I came to the very smart conclusion that my stepfather was a drug dealer, and he had been using us to transport his drugs to and from his customers at the riverbank under the guise of fishing. It was no wonder he had so many friends there. We couldn't let Tim know that we knew his secrets, because it would mean death for us. But we saw it as an opportunity to let our mother know. Maybe it would finally be the thing to make her leave him for being abusive to her and us. My mother's response was a shoe to the head and a hushed yell about how we needed to mind our businesses, or we could end up just like her. She proceeded to show us her severely bruised body from where he hurt her. The sight made me really mad, and I promised myself that I would get my family free of this crappy and heartless man before I had to leave for college. By the summer before I resumed college, I'd filled out a lot from all the sports I did at school. So I got a job as the cleaner at one of the clubs that Tim used to work at. While there, I got a lot of gossip about my stepfather, including the fact that he was actually a legitimate drug dealer, and that was the reason why he was fired from the job. He told us that it was because he was trying to protect a girl from getting assaulted. My initial plan was to take all of the evidence to the police so they could arrest him and take him away. But I had to be a little careful so I wouldn't get incriminated. A month into my job, I was leaving work and a young girl walked up to me. She looked pretty young but was obviously heavily pregnant, despite the layers of clothes she wore. She said her name was Anna, fake name. She was 15 and she needed to tell me something really important. I took her to a restaurant, got her lunch, and then we proceeded to talk. Anna told me that my stepfather was the father of her child. A 15-year-old was nearly 8 months pregnant with my 52-year-old stepfather. I didn't believe her at first, wondering if she was just doing it for attention or something. But then she mentioned that she wasn't the only girl that Tim had gotten his way with. She mentioned a few names, girls who used to be friends with my sisters, and then changed schools or just stopped coming by our house. All of it suddenly made sense to me. The complaints that my little sisters made about him being inappropriate, and how our mother brushed it off as him being affectionate with his stepkids. I wasted no time in calling up my brother, and we took Anna to the police station. Together, we filed a case against him for impregnating an underage girl, drug trafficking, and domestic abuse against his wife and stepchildren. Tim was used to paying off some of the police to overlook his messed up behaviors, but there's only so much that can be covered up. He was busted at the riverbank where he sold with 2 other kids. Apparently, he used children to transport his drugs because the police were less likely to suspect kids holding bags of bait, and it generally made him look like he was more of a responsible person. The court case was messy to witness because there were so many testimonies against him that in the end he was looking at spending over 70 years in prison with all the accrued charges. He had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages to my family, as well as in child support for Anna, whose parents had thrown her out. My mother agreed to take her in because it made her feel a tad better about ignoring all of our warnings about Tim and his jerk nature. I can't recall how many years Tim got in the end, but it's been about 8 years since the entire incident. My siblings and I still laugh about how we were getting raised to have drug dealing be a family business. But the trauma that came with it was not in any way hilarious at the time. Once I started earning a reasonable enough salary, I put myself in therapy because some of these things stick with you, no matter how hard you try to shake them off. Anna and her kid live just next door to us, and he likes my brother more than the rest of us. He's a little star, and my siblings and I are working on being better parents to him than Tim could have ever have been. Now, I'm not saying that a situation like this would ever warrant the death penalty, but Tim getting sentenced to like 70 plus years in prison, it kind of makes me think about situations where that penalty is on the table, and it kind of got me wondering, what seems worse, life in prison or straight up the death penalty? Personally, as far as like what's worse and honestly what's more just, I've always been kind of more life sentence, because honestly I feel like there's nothing worse than just sitting in a cell for decades. But I would be greatly interested to know which way you guys lean on it and how you guys feel. So let me know in the comments down below. That said, our final story of the day is I dated my boss's ex to rattle her. Some years back, I got a job as an assistant at a magazine company's fashion department. I plan to work my way up from being an assistant to gaining enough experience to work in big fashion and clothing companies in the future. I was to work directly under the head of the fashion department, but also for the company, so I was interviewed by both the guys at Human Resources and the head of the fashion department, who was to be my boss. The general interview with HR went well, and the second interview was with the fashion head of the department. I knew she was going to be trouble when I first met her. First, she sized me up and took a glance at a file before her, a file that I knew contained my resume. I was a lot taller than she was, actually at 6 feet. I was taller than most women I knew. "You are tall," was the first thing she said to me with a stern look on her face. I didn't know how to respond to her, so I just smiled bashfully, thinking to myself that I should probably take it as a compliment. She said she was impressed with my resume and was going to send word to HR that I was great for the job. She didn't ask any more questions. On my first day at work, I met a pretty young lady in the elevator. She was just about my age. She seemed friendly, so I introduced myself to her. "Wait, do you work in fashion?" she asked, her eyes wide open when I answered her question about what department I was going to start work in. "Yep," I replied enthusiastically. I was excited about working in fashion. It was my dream. I mean, I knew my job was mostly going to be basic stuff at first, but still, I was happy just to be in rooms where fashion was being discussed. "Girl," my new friend said, shaking her head, "I don't know if I should congratulate you on your new job or cry for you." "Why?" I asked, puzzled. "Girl, you're about to work for the devil herself. Your boss is the most terrible creature that has ever existed on Earth." I say, "She does seem a bit stern." They say, "Stern? What she is plain evil. Good luck though." I was too stunned to move when the elevator stopped. She said, "Girl, knock that look off your face. You don't want to annoy your demon boss." "Shh," I cautioned. People could hear her. "Your boss is a horrible, horrible person," she said in an attempted whisper. I call it an attempted whisper because she could not whisper to save her life. Even the muffled sound she made was loud. "You must be the new girl," someone called out to me, and my new friend left me and hurried away. I said, "Yes, hello, my name is..." "I know your name, walk with me." I walked behind him, bumping into things and people on the way until we got to my boss's door. I hesitated. "Is she mean?" I asked the guy. "I hear she's a really horrible person, and that's just so ironic because people expect tall girls to be mean and wicked and shorter girls to be all cute and nice." I stopped rambling when I noticed that the guy was not smiling. He said, "First of all, there are no girls here, just women. This isn't high school, and that's my aunt you're talking about." I gasped and placed my right hand on my chest. "I'm so sorry. I don't think she's mean, of course. I've met her and..." He rolled his eyes. "Yes, she's my aunt. Yes, she's a little mean. Now go in, she needs you." That was how my journey of misery started. My boss was just as terrible as my elevator friend at work said. There was no moment of rest at the office. I was always doing something, and whenever I had just a little time to sit for a while, she would be so mad about it and create something for me to do. It was the same thing with everyone who worked with her. She would yell at us, keep us on our toes, and use insulting words on us. It was so bad that I went home every day thoroughly sad. I expected that I would have a swell time learning and working towards working as a major person in fashion, but it was the complete opposite. The large dressing room terrified me. I was not excited to come to work, and after work I would be terribly sad. Apart from the toxic environment she created for employees in that department and how she hurls insults at me, she never lets me do anything major. I got her coffee, printed papers, and held her stuff, but that was it. I would sometimes offer to help to do more, but she would yell at me, so I just stopped. She spoke condescendingly to me too. Not once did she ever call me by my name. She just snapped her fingers. It was humiliating, but somehow, despite the numerous complaints that had been sent out about her, she was never relieved of her job. My elevator friend explained that it was because she was very good at her job. That was true, my boss was very productive. She got things done and was very efficient. "How do you know so much about her anyway?" I asked my elevator friend. "I used to work in fashion before I moved to beauty." I said, "Really?" I knew there had to be a reason she knew so much. She says, "Yes, I can't believe I didn't even mention it." She was my boss too. She was terrible, but I hear she's way worse now with the separation and all. I say, "Separation?" My friend went on to explain that my boss had recently separated from her husband, and they were getting a divorce. They were seeing a marriage counselor, but her husband pulled out and decided that they were better off divorced. Her husband was a big recipient of her aggression, my friend revealed. They said, "There were rumors that when they fight or argue, she throws things around and destroys stuff." I say, "Isn't that like abusive behavior?" They say, "Yeah, the poor guy was never going to leave her, but he had enough and ran for dear life." My job in that super toxic workplace continued, and I was determined to see it through. I considered resigning a couple of times, but I genuinely enjoyed working in fashion and wanted to grow my experience to enable me to find employment elsewhere. One day, I learned that a position in the fashion department was open. I was glad. I decided I was going to apply. I would still be working in my boss's department, of course, but at least it would mean a promotion if I'm selected. A promotion would mean an increase in my salary and bring me closer to being a major person in fashion. In addition to these, I wouldn't have to serve my boss coffee and deal with her regular condescending remarks. I applied for the position and waited patiently to be invited for an interview. Luckily for me, I was invited. I almost broke into a dance when I was notified of this. My elevator friend was present and she was happy for me too. She warned me, however, to watch out for my boss, saying, "She's going to be a part of the team that'll interview you, so you want to be on your best behavior so she won't put you down and reduce your chances of getting a promotion." I understood what my friend was saying, but I'd always been on my best behavior. Despite my boss's annoying attitude, I did what was asked of me and never even complained. I was so certain that she would reward this. There was no reason for her to try and sabotage my chances. I even believed that she would talk me up. No one can be that evil, I said out loud to myself while thinking about it when I returned home. I was severely wrong. My boss expressed at the interview that she wasn't certain I could take on more serious roles. She went on and on about how it was best to keep me in my current position and have me learn more about my duties than to hand me a promotion. I felt downtrodden and betrayed. That ruined my mood and my confidence was smashed. I could barely even answer the questions the two other interviewers asked me. My friend wasn't surprised when I told her, saying, "I told you that woman's vile. She puts the B in witch." She comforted me and hoped I'll get the job anyway. I wasn't shocked at all when I wasn't offered the job. It was passed to someone else who wasn't even in the company before. The guy I had met on my first day of work, who said he was her nephew, said she probably did that because she knew I was good at my job and wanted to keep me serving her. I didn't care about her reasons. There was no reasonable reason for her to sabotage me as she did. I was very mad at my boss, and I swore to get back at her in some way. Early one morning, I was rushing to work and was just close to missing the elevator. "Please hold it," I screamed from afar to the person in the elevator. He held out his hand to keep the elevator door open, and I jumped in. The guy in the elevator was a cute, middle-aged man. I smiled at him. "I'm sorry, my boss is the weirdest person ever. I can't begin to imagine what she would do to me if I was 5 seconds late to work." He smiled politely at me and said, "It's okay." I say, "Do you work at this magazine? I've never seen you. I work in fashion." He smiled again and said, "No, I don't. I'm here to see my ex-wife. She works in fashion too." I just knew that it had to be my boss's ex-husband. I said, "Are you?" He said, "Yeah, I guess you're new." "Not so much," was my response. We got out of the elevator and he walked straight into her office. My work desk was just at the entrance of her office and her office was transparent, so I could see them arguing but didn't hear them. Some minutes later, he walked out of her office looking upset. I turned around to look and saw her break down in tears. Her eyes met mine, so she walked briskly and shut the blinds so I could no longer see her. When I turned around, an idea came to my mind. A perfect idea to get back at my toxic boss. I raced down to catch up with her husband. Just as he was about to get in the elevator, I stepped in with him. He looked up from his phone. "Oh, it's you again." I flashed him my brightest, biggest smile. "I'm curious about your ex-wife. Why is she like that?" He raised his eyebrows. "You mean, why is she mean-spirited?" I say, "Well, yes, why?" He says, "I don't know, and quite frankly, I can't be bothered. She's not my problem anymore." I sighed and asked if he wanted to get a drink together. It was a very audacious thing to do, besides I was there, asking out someone who was years older, and I was doing it just to irritate my boss. "Are you asking me out?" he asked. I could tell he was just as surprised as I was that I could even do that, but I could also tell that he was flattered. Anyway, he agreed to go out with me, and I took his number. We went out together for at least 2 nights every week for months. He would witch about his ex-wife, and I would complain about how she was a horrible boss. We both bonded over how she had stressed us out. It was kind of fun. One day, he asked if I asked him out just to do what we were doing, and I admitted to him that I just did it to annoy his ex-wife. He laughed and said, "How can she be annoyed? She doesn't even know we're dating." A friend of theirs was having his engagement party that weekend, so I suggested he take me as his date. "She'll find out if you take me," I said. Imagine how embarrassed she would be if she found out her assistant was with her ex. He agreed to take me. That weekend, we both showed up to the engagement party, arm in arm. A friend of hers who drops in the office all the time saw me holding hands with her ex-husband and gasped. She couldn't help it. When my boss saw me, she couldn't hide the shock and then embarrassment. It was written boldly on her face. Her ex-husband and I had a lot of fun. Laughing, talking, and occasionally kissing. It was obvious to anyone who knew the story that we were trying to get to her, but we didn't care because it looked like we were doing a good job. After the party, he thanked me profusely. "I feel like a bad boy," he said with a smirk on his face. "I have not felt this good in a long while. It feels good to be the petty one for once." That night, she called him and went off on him. I felt fulfilled to have rattled her that much. Of course, I told my elevator work friend about it and we had a good laugh. I was actively searching for a new job. I could no longer work in that environment, especially after what happened. My boss never spoke to me about my relationship with her ex. Funnily, she couldn't do anything to me that would hurt because whatever she could do, she had already done. So I was totally used to her being a really horrible boss. Surprisingly, she was a lot better at relating with me. She hardly yelled and wasn't as condescending when she spoke to me. I got a job elsewhere some months later. It was a relief because working there after showing up as her ex-husband's date had me on my toes. I still think of how exhilarating it was doing that, and just thinking how hurt she must have felt makes me even happier. As for her ex-husband, we broke up. It was expected anyway, so I was very okay with that happening. There was no way we could start a relationship off a mutual dislike for his ex-wife. It wasn't healthy, and I certainly did not want to be with someone who went on and on about his ex-wife. It's definitely a very unique situation to generate a relationship out of. I'm kind of wondering how successful a relationship like this could be. Because I kind of do agree that having a relationship born out of a agreed hatred of another person, one that one of them had been married to before, was just not going to ever be a great recipe for a long-lasting serious relationship. Do you guys think the stark age difference alone is reason enough to not go further with this? I mean, OP doesn't clarify how old they are, but they're just now looking to get into the fashion industry. So they're definitely a lot younger than middle-aged. Was there any way that it was ever realistic for this to work out? Or is everything about this just doomed? I'd like to know what you guys think. Sister ratted on me for sneaking out, so I messed with her shampoo. Of all the wise quotes and sayings of this world, the one I hold with the highest regard is the one about snitches and stitches. Here's why. A few weeks ago, I got invited to a house party, an actual house party, something that rarely ever happens. As a high school freshman, a science nerd, and a video game lover, I wasn't exactly popular in school. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I only hung out with the other science nerds. So to be invited to a party with the popular kids was like a dream come true for me. Cherry on top, my high school crush and the star of my wet dreams, Bianca, was going to be there. Tiny-sized cherry atop the regular-sized cherry, she invited me to the party herself. How on earth did this happen? There she was, one of the most beautiful and popular girls in school, inviting me to a party. Stuff like this only happened in fairy tales, and never in real life. My friends were sure it was going to be a prank. I thought so too, but I decided to go anyway. I won't know unless I find out. My only problem now was, of course, convincing my super religious parents to let me go out Friday night and probably do some underage drinking. Easy peasy. Thursday night we were having dinner. Dad was going on and on about something, a new golf club that he wanted to buy, or was it about a coworker that just had a baby? Anyways, he was talking a lot. And Mom was smiling and laughing at his jokes tonight. They were both in a good mood. Best time to pop the question, I decided. I got invited to a party on Friday night, I said, picking up my pasta and meatballs without looking at their faces. The whole table went silent as I spoke. After a moment of unbearable silence, I decided to look up. They were all staring at me, Mom, Dad, and my older sister Meg. "What kind of party?" my dad asked calmly. Dang, Dad played that card. This line of questioning was a trap, and you could never answer correctly. I turned to Meg for support, telling her about Bianca's party. Meg looked at me with eyes as wide as saucers. "You got invited to Bianca's party? How come I wasn't invited?" she asked as her face turned green with jealousy. My sister, a senior year student, has always been one of those wannabe popular girls that nobody truly liked. You know, the narcissistic and self-serving type witches that derive a sick pleasure in putting other people down to make themselves feel good. Little wonder why I wasn't surprised that she wasn't invited to the party. The fact that you felt the need to mention that you won't be drinking at the party makes me even more worried that you will be drinking, or worse, doing drugs. That's my dad. He has the superhuman ability to construe every situation to make it sound worse than it actually was. My first instinct was to argue, but I knew better. I continued to pick at my food, listening to my parents drone on about the reasons why I shouldn't go. They even talked about the possibility of an arrest and jail time. Bunch of drama queens. I left the table and headed to my room, annoyed at my parents for trying to ruin my chances with Bianca and the opportunity to prove myself with the popular kids. As I lay on my bed that night, I devised a plan to sneak out of the house after bedtime. Surprised? Of course, I only asked for permission as a courtesy. I wouldn't actually not go because they said so. Bianca's party was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I'm not going to let it slide. I heard a knock on my door. As I revised my plan in my head for the millionth time, Meg walked in before I could give her permission to enter. She was still fuming about the fact that I got invited to the party and she wasn't. When she asked how, I shrugged and told her that Bianca possibly liked me. Meg let out a dry laughter, looking me over. Ha, yeah right, Bianca likes you, and I'm the Queen of England. Awkward timing. I rolled my eyes as she said this. I've gotten used to her snarky remarks and they don't hurt anymore like they used to. She walked around my room silently till her focus fell on the windows. She opened it and looked outside. There was a big tree by my side of the house, with one of the branches stretching close to my window. I hope you're not even thinking of sneaking out, she said with a smug smile on her face. I denied vehemently until she threatened to tell if I did. I nearly fell off my bed as she said this. What? You sneak out to parties all the time and I never ratted you out once, I said. She merely shrugged, then made to leave. Please, Meg, it's my only shot. If I don't show up to this party, I'll never get invited to another. I pleaded desperately. Meg sighed, pacing around for a while. Eventually, the best she could do was to promise to think about it. I didn't really care about what Meg decides to do because I've made up my mind to go to this party, and nothing is going to stop me. I just prefer it if she didn't tell because I might be grounded for the rest of my life. The next day after dinner, I said goodnight to my parents and headed to my room. I put on my selected clothes, then lay back in bed. A few minutes later, Mom came to check on me, a bid to ensure that I haven't snuck out. We said goodnight one more time, and she shut the door. As soon as she left, I jumped out of bed and propped my pillows to make it look like I was still in bed. I opened the window without making a sound, then climbed the branches down. Then, I got on my bike and pedaled to Bianca's party. Bianca's party was the most fun I've had in a long time, and I was so happy I went. As soon as I got there, I spotted Bianca at the far end of the room. She waved at me, then gestured for me to come closer. She offered me some beer, and even though I convinced myself that I wasn't gonna drink, I couldn't bring myself to say no to her. Then we decided to take a walk. We talked at length and shared some really good laughs. And I could already picture my future with her and our beautiful babies, a boy and a girl to be precise. When it was time for me to leave, she asked me if I wanted to hang out this weekend. I said yes, and we decided on the time and place. I got home a few hours after midnight and proceeded to climb back up the same way I got down. As soon as I tiptoed into my room and closed the window, the lights came on and I saw my mom and dad looking sternly at me, with Meg in another corner snickering at my predicament. Busted. In my household, one of the worst crimes a child could commit was disobedience. And for that, you could get the capital punishment. I told you not to go to that party, didn't I? My dad started. I couldn't meet his glance. I was a bit tipsy at the moment, and I'm sure he would notice if I looked at him. My mom walked towards me, raising my face to hers, her eyebrows furrowed with suspicion as she looked into my eyes. Oh no. She brought her nose close to my mouth. Dang it, she's gonna smell the beer. You had alcohol, she yelled. It was only half a cup. I swear, I said, which was a lie. I played a drinking game to impress Bianca, and I had over 5 cups of beer and a few shots of vodka. Before I got grounded indefinitely, my dad gave me a long speech on how I disappointed the family, then something about me not going to college. I can't really say because I kind of spaced out during that time, but I swear he mentioned something about Obama and Neil Armstrong. When I remembered my day with Bianca, I snapped out of it for a moment and pleaded with them to let me go one last time before I start my punishment. As expected, my plea was denied. When my parents left, I turned and listened to Meg laughing triumphantly. That was the kind of sister I had. The type that bullies me at every chance she gets, just to feel good about herself. I wanted to yell at her, wanted to call her names and throw stuff, but I decided not to because I was scared to waste my anger. Also because I didn't have the money to replace anything I broke. I spent the next few days thinking of a plan to get back at my sister. I wanted to hit her where it hurts. I've only got one shot and it had to be precise. Bianca didn't talk to me in school after I stood her up. I didn't even get to tell my side of the story because she wouldn't listen. This only worked to make me even more mad at my sister. One day, when I wasn't making any headway in coming up with a plan of my own, I decided to enlist the help of my friend Lewis. Lewis was one of the greatest pranksters the school has ever known. He was very skilled at customizing his pranks to fit the victim's personality, and he even has a way of making them look artistic, aesthetic even. I explained my problem to him, and he readily agreed to help. We spent the most part of lunchtime coming up with a plan. We came up with some really good plans, but we had to drop them because we might just end up in jail. "I've got it," Lewis said after a while. What is it?" I asked. "Your sister thinks of herself as popular. She's the type that cares about her looks and puts what other people think of her above all other things. That's where we'll hit her." I still didn't get it until Lewis explained in detail. By the time he was done, I was so happy that I hugged him tightly. Lewis was a genius. The plan was simple. All I needed to do was get a ridiculously colored hair dye, purple, peach, or blue, and then mix it in her shampoo. When she tries to wash her hair, it'll change her hair color and mess up her fingers and face. She's going to look like an alien for the rest of the week. And, knowing my parents, they wouldn't let her skip school since she wasn't physically ill. It was perfect. Lewis even offered to help me get the dye since I was still grounded. The next day, Lewis and I met at the school parking lot at the end of the school day. He looked around to make sure that no one was looking at him before he passed me the blue hair dye. He gave the instructions on how to use it, then warned me strongly not to get any on my skin and to get rid of the container so it wouldn't be traced back to me. I collected the container and dropped it in my bag, then tried to give him the money for the hair dye, but he wouldn't have it. "It's all good, man. Being part of a good prank is payment enough." That same night after dinner, I lay on my bed wide awake. I listened to every sound, every movement till the house got quiet. I waited some more, then looked at my watch. It was 11:30, go time. I jumped out of bed and tiptoed to my sister's room. I opened the door slightly and peeked in. She was fast asleep. I opened the door wider, then walked gingerly into her bathroom. Her bathing kit was on the shelf, so I picked up the shampoo and poured in the hair dye. The shampoo container was opaque, so she wouldn't notice the color change. Then I returned the shampoo to its original position. I also dropped the blue hair dye on the shelf. I wanted my parents to think she was the owner, to throw them off my scent. Then I closed the shelf, returned to my room, and slept off with a smile on my face, waiting patiently for the fireworks. The next day was a Tuesday. I never particularly liked Tuesdays, but this one was special. As I sat at the breakfast table, digging into my toast and bacon, it was as though the sun was shining brighter. The birds were singing a more beautiful tune than the other days, and the sky was a bit more colorful. It was beautiful. Only one thing can make it perfect now. My sister screamed from her room. I smiled happily as I heard her rushing down the stairs and towards the kitchen. "Oh my God," I heard Mom say. I looked up to Meg as she stomped into the kitchen, and man, it was a disaster. I laughed so hard that the force sent me falling backwards and off my chair. Even my dad was fighting hard to keep himself from laughing. Meg's previously blonde hair was a mess. The blue dye was inconsistent and it gave her hair the pattern that resembles that of a zebra's fur. Only the zebra's fur was way more beautiful. The best part is, her hair wasn't even the worst part. Her face and hands were way more messed up. She looked like a low-budget Raven from X-Men. She screamed and cried and tried to convince my parents that I did it, but they didn't believe her, since there was no way I could have gotten dye from the store, because I was still grounded, and they found the dye container in her bathroom shelf. Meg then refused to go to school till she could get the stain off, but when my parents threatened to ground her till she goes to college, she had no choice. Lewis and I had a good laugh at school when the other kids started to call her Mama Smurf. The nickname stuck with her till she graduated. That'll teach her never to snitch on anyone ever again. I mean, I get why OP did it. You got the one chance at the girl of your dreams, especially at a time in your life where OP's at, where, frankly, you probably want nothing more than that more than ever. Frankly, it's like world crushing. That said, the story's got me thinking pretty heavily about like how I shampoo. It makes me think like if I was in the sister's position here, how far would I have gone before I realized my hands and my hair are all getting dyed blue? Would you notice right away? Or when you shampoo, do you instinctively just shut your eyes and go through the process till you're done? Would you be doomed to look like a Smurf too? Let me know about you guys in the comments down below. And our final story of the day is Mom cheated on Dad, so I maxed out her credit card. All my life, I've always prided myself as a builder, a nurturer. I love to watch things grow and it brings me great joy. I've never once been a destroyer. It's not in my nature, and I could literally get physically ill from trying. This is why I never revealed the secret that could potentially pull down my family and end my parents' marriage. The secret of my mom cheating on my dad. But I also believe that no sinner should go unpunished. I couldn't let her go scot-free with what she had done. That's why I made her pay a very expensive price. But let's start at the beginning. I was born into a family that was filled with so much love. I mean, they didn't say it all the time, but I saw it. I felt it even. That's what love is, right? It's shown in the actions and not the words. My family didn't have a lot of money growing up, but my dad worked his butt off to make sure we had everything we needed. When I was 10, my dad used to work double shifts 5 times a week as a nurse in the local hospital. He wasn't around much, but anytime he gets home, he's usually very tired and goes off to sleep almost immediately. On the rare occasions when he's not so tired, he would listen to me talk about my day and even read me bedtime stories. On the Sundays when he doesn't have to show up at work, he would cook breakfast, mostly pancakes because that's the only food he knows how to cook. Other experiments usually turn out to be a big disaster, and read out the Sunday paper in funny accents. It was fun. My mom, on the other hand, used to work the morning shift at a convenience store in the fancy part of town. She used to pick me up from school every day, and I would stay with her in the store till her shift ended. I loved those times because the store owner, I called him Mr. Baldy, gave me candy anytime I helped him sort out pennies. The first problem we faced as a family was when my mom lost her job because the store closed down. Mr. Baldy couldn't afford to keep paying his loan to the bank. All the financial responsibility fell on Dad's shoulders, and soon enough, his paycheck from the hospital couldn't pay up all the bills, and he knew he had to step up. He started to take night classes at the local university, and after a few years, he got a degree and became a doctor. Our financial situation got better, and soon enough, we could afford a better apartment. Dad was so good at his job, and he started getting invited to lectures and seminars out of town, and sometimes even out of the country. I was happy for him. I knew my mom was too, or at least I thought she was. My parents had their first real fight a few years ago on the eve of Christmas. Dad went for a seminar in New York City on the 22nd of December and was supposed to get back on Christmas Eve, so we could spend Christmas together. We used to wear our PJs for the whole day, watch every bad Christmas movie ever made, play board games, and open our gifts as a family. It had been a long-standing tradition, and we've never once missed it. But that year, it looked like Dad was about to break that streak. After the seminar in New York, a corporate medical organization who had been scouting him for a position in their firm invited him over for a sit-down in their headquarters, which was also based in New York, on the 26th. He couldn't possibly fly home and back in time for the meeting, so he proposed to Mom that he wanted to stay in New York till the 26th. Mom got mad and yelled at him over the phone, and then refused to talk to him or even pick his calls up. I was young then, 15 at the time, but in my opinion, Mom's behavior was kind of overkill. I understood the struggles Dad faced with finances just a few years back, and how he fought his way out of that rat race. I felt like every other thing he did was to make sure that he never went back to that situation. I respected that, and I expected Mom to do so too. Anyways, Dad decided to cancel the sit-down, which meant saying no to that big shot job in New York, and got on the next flight back to town. He got back home on the night of Christmas Eve, just a few minutes before midnight, and apologized profusely to my mom and me for almost missing Christmas. She forgave him, and we had a real Merry Christmas. This should have been where we had our happily ever after, but this is real life. Happily ever after is still so far away. As Dad's career grew, he started to be in more demand than ever. More medical organizations started to call him for consultations after consultations. and he barely ever worked on the small hospital in town anymore. He had to travel every week, and he was hardly ever at home. Sometimes we'd go a month without seeing him, but through all this, he tried to keep up with calls, texts, and Skype. But this wasn't enough for Mom. She would yell and nag at him every chance she gets about abandoning the family or not making enough time or something else. Sometimes I wonder what she truly wanted, because it was bad when we were broke, and now we're stable and you're complaining? I felt like there was something underneath all that nagging, but I didn't put too much thought to it. One fall day, Mom announced at the dinner table that she wanted to start practicing yoga. I was really happy for her because she's making her health a priority and opening herself up to new things, but mainly because she would have less time to fight with Dad. I supported the idea wholeheartedly, even when she said she was getting a personal instructor. At first, I thought the instructor was going to be a girl or something. Imagine my surprise when I got home one day from school, only to meet a guy holding my mom's waist, helping her perform something called the downward dog pose. Really? Mom introduced her new yoga instructor to me. She told me his name, but I wasn't paying attention. So let's just go with Smugface. Smugface had wheat blonde hair, blue eyes, a perfect white set of teeth, tan skin, and a body structure that would make Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson proud. I hated him instantly. But aside from the hatred that came with the first impression, I found Smugface extremely annoying. The way he talked, walked, made jokes, and smiled all screamed pretentious. His French accent was fake. He probably had his teeth whitened, and I suspected that he only owns a fancy car because he was overcompensating for something. My mom, on the other hand, loved him. She was always laughing and giggling like a little girl at his jokes, playing with her hair and blushing whenever he gave her a compliment. It was sickening to watch. One day, I got so close to calling Dad to fire the yoga instructor, but things were finally getting better between them. Mom hadn't nagged him in a long time. I wouldn't want that to start again. I also believed that no matter the problems Mom had with Dad, she would never get back at him by cheating. Psych. Anyways, that fateful morning, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, literally because I fell off my bed. That little accident fouled my mood for the rest of the day. At first, I told my mom that I didn't want to go to school because I had a small swelling on my head. She promptly disagreed, saying I shouldn't miss a whole day of school because of a tiny swell. I should have suspected that something was up at that time, but I didn't. I held an ice pack to my head and rode my bike all the way to school with one hand. When I got to school, I had an altercation with one of the boys in senior year. I'll call him Piggy because that's what every other person called him behind his back, because he was fat and kind of a jerk. Piggy saw the swell on my head and said something really rude, something like, "Yo, you should get that looked at." Well, thinking about it now, it doesn't actually sound rude. Helpful, really, but as I said earlier, I wasn't really in a good mood. First, I fell off my bed. Then my mom wouldn't even let me stay home, and now this guy is giving me unwanted medical advice? I snapped. I replied to him saying, "Yo, you should mind your own business, Piggy." Yeah, I remember clearly now. I was the jerk. Remember when I said people called him Piggy behind his back? Yeah, well, that's because they were scared of the consequences of saying it to his face. You see, the thing I didn't mention about Piggy is the fact that he's the only overweight kid that could never be bullied. Why? Because he was strong, extremely strong. He turned to me and in one quick step covered the distance between us and punched my nose. I fell back, tasted blood in my mouth. Turns out my nose was broken. My shirt was ruined with dots of blood and I didn't have my gym clothes. So I went out in the hallway, got on my bike and pedaled home so my mom could take me to the hospital. On the way home, I tried to think of lies I could tell my mom about how I got my nose broken. If she heard that I was involved in a fight, I'll be grounded for life. Well, to be fair, it wasn't much of a fight, was it? One punch and it was night-night for me. I got home and saw the yoga instructor's Chevrolet Camaro parked in the driveway. Ugh, Smugface was around. I was about to use my key to open the front door when I heard them. I was confused at first, so I placed my ear to the door. I heard my mom moaning? What the heck? I could also hear Smugface's stupid voice grunting like a bull. I couldn't see them though, so I didn't want to jump into any horrible conclusions. Maybe they were working on a very athletic yoga routine or something. I didn't believe that, but I at least have to give my mom the benefit of the doubt. I tiptoed over to the window, which was hidden by a tree with lots of leaves. I crouched when I got to the window, then peeked. That's when I saw them, my mom and the yoga instructor, unclothed and going at it like a bunch of rabbits. I think I threw up in my mouth a little as I watched them. I was horrified to say the least. Angry, disappointed, hurt. I sat beneath the window looking at nothing in particular as I asked myself again and again, why? It hurt so much because I knew how much my dad loved my mom. I knew how much hearing about this would break him. I decided right there that I wouldn't tell him. I heard my mom moan one more time and I made another decision. I'm not going to let her get away with this. I stood up to peek one more time and reached for my phone in my pocket. I made a video and took a few pictures, then got on my bike and rode away. I went back to school and the nurse called my mom. When I was asked how I broke my nose, I told them I fell. That night I hacked into my mom's credit card company. Yeah, I'm good with computers, and checked her profile. She had a really nice credit score and a credit limit of up to $10,000. Way to go, Mom. My plan was coming together. The next day before school, I hacked into my mom's credit card profile once more, disabling her ability to cancel the card when she figured out that it had been stolen. I also bought a high-end pre-built gaming setup for $5,000 to be delivered that same day. On my way to school, I withdrew the remaining $5,000 from an ATM along the road and gave the homeless guy close to my school $2,000. I saw Piggy in the hallway when I got to school, so I walked up to him and apologized. I explained that I'd had a bad day and it was wrong of me to take it out on him. He also apologized for breaking my nose, so we buried the hatchet. I told him I needed his help, so we decided to meet up during lunch. I sat beside Piggy along with some of my other friends at the cafeteria and explained the problem to them. I wanted to teach Smugface a lesson too, so we decided to trash his fancy car. I didn't go home after school. I hung out with Piggy and the guys till nightfall, getting ready and making the plan ironclad. Smugface's address was easy to find, thanks to my magic with computers, so we set out with all our equipment, some iron baseball bats, knives, and masks. Smugface's car was parked in the driveway when we got there, so we immediately set to work, keeping as silent as possible. We started with the tires, using the knives to tear all four and rendering them unfixable. Then we used the knives to scratch the paint. I wrote the words, "Stay away from my mom," boldly on the hood and trunk. Then lastly, we used the bats to smash the windows and the body, turning the once beautiful ride into a piece of junk. Smugface came out of the house as soon as he heard the noise. He screamed like a little girl when he saw his car and tried to catch us, but we all got on our bikes and rode away. We were all wearing masks, so he couldn't recognize any of us. I thanked the guys for a job well done and gave them $2,000 to share, then headed home. As soon as I crossed through the front door, my mom began to yell and even threatened to call the police if I didn't return the money I stole. I waited till she had finished, then brought out my phone to show her the video I took. She sat down and watched, speechless and in shock. "Why?" I asked her when the video ended. She couldn't answer. She only begged me not to tell my dad. She promised that it was a one-time mistake and it wouldn't happen again. I didn't believe that it happened one time, but what I believed was that it wouldn't happen again because I made sure of it. Honestly, I feel like there is no way that OP went and carved "Stay away from my mom" on this guy's car and did not get in any kind of trouble. That's like an instant implication police report right there. If that really happened, OP is really lucky to have not have caught a charge from that. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, click on that left video, or if you missed my latest video, check out the one on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.